Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Thomas Blackwater, and I've been a forest ranger for 15 years. I thought I knew everything about surviving in the wilderness. I was wrong. It was February 1963, and Virginia was buried under the worst winter anyone could remember. The temperature hadn't climbed above zero in 3 weeks, and the snow kept falling. Ravens Peak, where I worked, was completely cut off from the world. No roads, no phone lines, no way in or out until spring. I didn't mind the isolation. After 2 tours in Korea and 15 years in these mountains, I was used to being alone. My job was teaching survival skills to military units, showing them how to stay alive when everything went wrong. I was good at it too. I could make fire from wet wood, find food where others saw nothing, and keep warm in conditions that would kill most people in hours. The cabin where I lived sat at 4,200 feet, just below the peak itself. It was a solid building, built to last through the worst weather nature could throw at it. I had enough food stored up to last until April, a good radio for emergencies and all the gear a man could need. But that morning, something felt different. I woke up hungry, really hungry, in a way that didn't make sense. I'd eaten a full dinner the night before, canned stew, bread, even some chocolate. My stomach should have been satisfied. Instead, it felt like I hadn't eaten in days. I made breakfast anyway, eggs, bacon, coffee. The smell should have made my mouth water, but it didn't. The food tasted like nothing. Worse than nothing. It made the hungry feeling stronger. Outside, the world was white and silent. Too silent. In 15 years on this mountain, I'd never heard such complete quiet. No birds, no squirrels chattering. No sounds at all except the wind through the trees. Even that sounded wrong somehow, like it was whispering words I couldn't quite understand. I put a on my snowshoes and headed out to check my weather instruments. The snow was deeper than I'd ever seen it, maybe 15 feet in some places. Walking was hard work, but I'd done it thousands of times before. That's when I found the first track. It was huge, maybe 2 feet long, pressed deep into the snow. At first glance, it looked like a human footprint, but wrong in every way that mattered. Too long, too narrow, with what looked like claw marks at the end of each toe. Whatever made it was walking on 2 legs, but it wasn't human. I knelt down and studied it carefully. The track was fresh, maybe an hour old. The edges were still sharp, and there was no wind drift covering it. Something had walked past my cabin while I was sleeping. I followed the trail. It led up toward the peak, moving in a straight line through snow that should have been impossible to walk through. Whatever made these prints was either incredibly strong or incredibly light. The tracks were spaced far apart too, longer strides than any human could make. After about a quarter mile, the trail stopped, just ended, like whatever was making it had simply vanished into thin air. I looked around, checking the trees, the rocks, anywhere something might have climbed or jumped. Nothing. That's when I smelled it. It was faint at first, just a hint of something rotten on the wind. But as I stood there, it got stronger. Sweet and sick, like meat left out in the sun too long. My empty stomach twisted, and for a crazy moment, the smell almost made me hungry instead of sick. I'd smelled death before. In the war, in the forest when I'd found hikers who didn't make it through the winter. This was different. Older, like something that had been dying for a very long time. I headed back to the cabin as fast as I could move through the snow. The hungry feeling was getting worse, gnawing at me like a living thing. I tried, eating again when I got back. More bacon, some canned fruit, anything to fill the emptiness in my belly. Nothing worked. As the sun went down, I sat by my radio and tried to raise someone, anyone, on the emergency frequency. Static. Just endless static. Like the whole world had gone quiet. That night I heard footsteps on my roof. Slow, careful steps, like someone was walking around up there. But the sound was wrong. Too heavy, too spaced out. Whatever was up there was big, and it was taking its time, like it was looking for something. I grabbed my rifle and went outside. The moon was full, and the snow reflected enough light to see clearly. The roof was empty. No tracks leading up to the cabin, no tracks leading away. Just my own footprints from earlier in the day. But when I went back inside, I could still hear the footsteps. They followed me as I moved from room to room, always right above where I was standing. When I stopped, they stopped. When I moved, they moved. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my chair with the rifle across my lap, listening to those footsteps pace back and forth above my head. And all night long, the hungry feeling grew stronger until it felt like it was eating me from the inside out. By morning, I knew something was very wrong on Raven's Peak. I just didn't know how wrong yet. The next day brought news that changed everything. My radio crackled to life around noon, the first real signal I'd gotten in weeks. It was base command from Fort Lee, about 50 miles south. The voice was scratchy and full of static, but I could make out the important parts. Ranger Station, military training unit, 12 men, overdue check-in, last known position. I grabbed the microphone. This is Ranger Blackwater at Raven's Peak Station. Say again about the missing unit. The voice came back clearer. Blackwater, thank God. We've got a survival training group that went silent 3 days ago. 12 soldiers on winter exercise. Their last radio contact put them somewhere near your position. My stomach dropped. What kind of exercise? Standard cold weather survival. They were supposed to establish base camp and live off the land for 1 week. Full rations for emergency backup. I looked out at the endless white landscape. In this weather with this much snow, even experienced soldiers could get into trouble fast. But 12 men with full gear and backup food should have been fine for a week. I'll search for them, I told base command. But weather's been bad up here, real bad. Roger that. Their call sign was Winter Wolf. Last transmission was coordinates. The voice faded into static before I could get the numbers. I spent the rest of that day preparing. Extra ammunition, medical supplies, emergency flares, everything I might need to help 12 men in trouble. The hungry feeling was still gnawing at me, but I pushed it aside. People needed help, and that was my job. I found their camp on the second day of searching. It was about 2 miles from my cabin, in a clearing that should have provided good shelter. They'd done everything right. Military tents arranged in a defensive circle, fire pit in the center, supplies organized and protected. These men knew what they were doing. But the camp was wrong in every way that mattered. The tents were still standing, but the walls were shredded from the inside. Long tears in the canvas, like someone had used knives or claws to cut their way out. The fire pit was cold, but there were bones scattered around it. Human bones. I found the first body 20 feet from the camp. It was one of the soldiers, still in his winter gear, but he'd been eaten. There was no other word for it. Chunks of flesh torn away, bite marks on the bones, pieces missing that could only have been chewed off and swallowed. The bite marks were huge. Whatever had done this had teeth like a bear, but arranged wrong. Too many of them, too sharp, too big for any animal I knew. But the worst part was his face. He was smiling. Even after being partially eaten alive, he was smiling like he'd just heard the best joke in the world. I found 3 more bodies scattered around. The clearing. All of them showed the same signs, eaten while still alive, but smiling. One of them was missing both arms and most of his chest, but his face looked peaceful, almost happy. The supply cache told an even stranger story. These men had brought enough food to last 2 weeks, military rations, high-energy bars, even some coffee and chocolate. Most of it was still there, unopened. They'd died with plenty of food just a few feet away. That made no sense. In survival situations, the first thing you do is protect your food supply. These were trained soldiers. They would have fought like hell to defend their rations. Instead, they'd ignored the food completely and done what? Eaten each other. I was examining the largest tent when I heard the voice. "Help me!" It was weak, barely a whisper coming from somewhere nearby. I grabbed my rifle and followed the sound. It led me to a pile of snow about 30 feet from the camp. "Help me, please." I dug fast, throwing snow aside with my hands. About 3 feet down, I found him. It was another soldier, buried but still alive. His face was blue with cold, but his eyes were open and aware. He tried to speak when he saw me, but only a dry croak came out. I got him to the surface and wrapped him in my extra coat. He was in bad shape, frostbite on his hands and feet, signs of starvation, probably hadn't eaten in days. But he was alive. "What happened here?" I asked him. His answer made my blood freeze. "We got so hungry," he whispered. "Hungrier than anything. Hungrier than possible. The food tasted like nothing, like cardboard. But Jimmy," he looked toward one of the bodies. "Jimmy tasted so good." I stared at him. "You ate your fellow soldiers?" He nodded, tears freezing on his cheeks. "We couldn't stop. Even when we knew it was wrong, we couldn't stop. It was like something else was making us do it, making us hungry for—" He swallowed hard. "For each other." "What about the creature? The thing with the teeth?" His eyes went wide with terror. "You've seen it?" "I found tracks. Bite marks. It didn't bite us," he said. "We did that. We bit each other. But it was there, watching. Tall as a tree, thin like a skeleton, with teeth like broken glass. It would whisper to us at night, tell us how good we would taste, how hungry we were, how much we needed to eat." He grabbed my arm with fingers that felt like ice. "It made us hungry," he said. "Not just for food. Hungry for flesh, human flesh. And the more we ate, the hungrier we got. Like the hunger was alive, growing inside us, taking over everything else." That's when I felt it again, that gnawing emptiness in my own stomach. The same feeling I'd been fighting for 2 days. And looking at this half-dead soldier, this man who'd eaten his friends and was still smiling about it, I understood. The hunger wasn't natural. It was something else. Something that lived in the cold and the snow and the endless winter night. Something that was still here, still watching, still waiting. And it was making me hungry too. I got the soldier back to my cabin, but he died before morning. Not from the cold or starvation or frostbite. He died smiling, chewing on his own fingers like they were the best meal he'd ever tasted. I tried to stop him, but he fought me with strength that shouldn't have been possible for a man in his condition. "So good," he kept saying between bites. "So good, so good, so good." The sound of his teeth grinding against bone will haunt me forever. I buried him in the snow behind my cabin and tried to make sense of what I'd learned. 12 trained soldiers had turned cannibal within days, ignoring perfectly good food to eat each other instead. Something had made them do it, something tall and thin with too many teeth, anything that could make people hungry for human flesh. That's when I remembered the stories. I'd heard them from Cherokee friends back when I was first learning to survive in these mountains. Stories about the Wendigo, creatures born from cannibalism, monsters that had once been human until hunger drove them to eat their own kind. The Cherokee said Wendigos could never be satisfied, no matter how much they consumed. They were always hungry, always hunting, always looking for new victims to share their curse. I'd laughed at those stories 15 years ago. I wasn't laughing now. The hungry feeling was getting worse. I'd tried eating everything in my cabin, canned meat, dried fruit, even raw flour mixed with water. Nothing helped. The emptiness in my stomach was spreading, becoming a need that regular food couldn't touch. And I was starting to look at the dead soldier's body in ways that scared me. On the 3rd night, I saw the Wendigo for the first time. I was sitting by my window watching the snow fall when something moved at the edge of the clearing. At first I thought it was just a tree swaying in the wind. Then it stepped into the moonlight. It stood maybe 13 feet tall, impossibly thin, with arms that hung down to its knees. Its skin was gray-white, like old snow, stretched tight over bones that showed through like tent poles. But it was the face that made my hands shake. Human, but wrong. The features were there, eyes, nose, mouth, but stretched and twisted like a reflection in a funhouse mirror. Its mouth was too wide, filled with yellow teeth that looked more like broken glass than anything meant for chewing. And its eyes were black holes that seemed to pull light into them and give nothing back. It looked right at me through the window and smiled. When it opened its mouth, I could hear its voice even through the glass. Not words exactly, but something that felt like words, like thoughts being pushed into my head. "Hungry," it said without speaking. "So hungry. Join us. Feed with us. Taste the only food that matters." I bed my rifle and fired 3 shots through the window. The creature didn't even flinch. The bullets seemed to pass right through it like it was made of mist. It just kept smiling and faded back into the trees, but its voice stayed in my head. "Hungry, hungry, always hungry. The only way to stop the hunger is to feed it. Feed it with warm flesh, fresh blood, the taste of life itself." That's when I understood what had happened to the soldiers. The Wendigo hadn't killed them. It had infected them. It had planted its hunger inside them like a seed, let it grow and spread until they couldn't think about anything else. And now it was doing the same thing to me. I lasted 2 more days before I snapped. I was trying to eat a can of beef stew, forcing myself to swallow even though it tasted like sawdust, when I smelled something that made my mouth water for the first time in a week. Meat. Fresh, warm meat, with blood still flowing through it. It was coming from behind the cabin, from where I'd buried the soldier. I found myself standing over his grave with a shovel in my hands, digging through the frozen ground like a madman. The smell was getting stronger, more beautiful than anything I'd ever experienced. My stomach cramped with need, and I could taste saliva flooding my mouth. The rational part of my brain was screaming at me to stop, to fight this, to remember that I was human, and humans didn't eat other humans. But that voice was getting weaker, while another voice, the Wendigo's voice, got stronger. "Yes," it whispered. "Dig. Feed. Satisfy the hunger that lives inside you now. Taste what you were always meant to taste." I had the body halfway uncovered when I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around, shovel raised like a weapon, expecting to see the Wendigo. Instead, I saw a man walking toward me through the snow. He was wearing the same military winter gear as the dead, so little ears, but he looked healthy, well-fed, normal. "Easy there, Ranger," he called out. "I'm not here to hurt you." I kept the shovel up. "Who are you?" "Sergeant Mills, Winter Wolf Training. Unit." "I got separated from my squad a few days ago, been trying to find them ever since." He looked at the hole I'd been digging, at the partially uncovered body. "Jesus, what happened here?" I should have been relieved to see another living person. Instead, all I could think about was how good he would taste. "There's something wrong with this place," I managed to say. "Something that makes people hungry." He nodded. "I know. I felt it too. That's why I came back. We need to help each other fight it." But as he got closer, I could see that something was wrong with his face. His smile was too wide, too happy for someone who'd just found a grave. And his eyes had that same black emptiness I'd seen in the Wendigo. "The hunger doesn't have to hurt," he said, still smiling. "It can feel good if you stop fighting it. My squad learned that. They stopped fighting, and it felt so good." That's when I realized he wasn't a survivor. He was one of the soldiers I'd found at the camp, one of the ones who'd been eaten down to the bone. But somehow, he was still walking around. "Join us," he said, reaching out with hands that ended in long, yellow claws. "Feed with us. The hunger is so much easier when you share it." I swung the shovel as hard as I could. It passed right through him like he was made of mist. He laughed, and the sound was like breaking glass. "You can't fight what you're becoming," he said. "Look at yourself. Look at what you were doing when I found you." I looked down at the hole, at the dead body I'd been trying to uncover, at my hands that were still trembling with need. He was right. I was losing the fight against whatever was happening to me. The only question, the dead soldier continued, is whether you want to join us willingly or whether you want us to help you along. That's when I saw them. More figures coming out of the trees, all 12. Soldiers from the Winter Wolf unit walking toward me through the snow. Some were missing arms or chunks of flesh. Others were just skeletons held together by frozen sinew. But they were all smiling, all reaching for me with clawed hands. And behind them, taller than the trees, the Wendigo itself stepped into the clearing. Feed, it said inside my head. Feed, and the hunger will stop hurting. Feed, and you can be part of us forever. I ran. I dropped the shovel and ran through the snow as fast as my legs could carry me. Behind me, I could hear them laughing, but they didn't chase. They didn't need to, because I could feel the hunger spreading through my body like poison. I could feel my teeth getting longer, sharper. I could feel my arms stretching, my fingers turning into claws. I was becoming one of them, and there was nowhere to run that would take me away from what I was turning into. I made it back to my cabin, but barely. My legs were longer now, stretching out with each step until I was covering ground like no human could. My hands had grown claws that scraped against my rifle when I tried to hold it. And the hunger, God, the hunger was everything. It wasn't just in my stomach anymore. It was in my bones, my blood, my thoughts. Every time I looked at my own reflection in the window, I wanted to bite into the flesh I saw there. I caught myself licking my lips when I thought about the taste of my own arm. I had maybe hours before the transformation was complete. Hours before I became like the soldiers, like the Wendigo itself. I had to figure out how to fight this, and I had to do it fast. I started going through everything I could remember about Wendigo legends. The Cherokee stories all said the same thing. Once someone turned cannibal, they were lost forever. The hunger would never stop, never be satisfied. They would keep eating until there was nothing left to eat, and then they would hunt for more. But there were other stories too. Older ones, from tribes that had actually fought Wendigos and won. Fire. They always mentioned fire. Wendigos were creatures of winter, of cold and hunger and endless night. They couldn't survive in heat, couldn't exist in places where warmth and light drove away the shadows. If I could create enough fire, enough heat, maybe I could drive the thing away. Or maybe I was just desperate and grasping at anything that felt like hope. I gathered everything flammable I could find. Kerosene, gasoline for my generator, propane tanks, even my furniture and clothes. I piled it all in the center of my main room and soaked it with fuel. If I was going to burn this thing out, I was going to do it right. That's when they came for me. The dead soldiers surrounded my cabin just after sunset. I could see them through the windows. 12 rotting corpses moving with purpose, their black eyes fixed on me. Some were crawling on all fours like animals. Others walked upright but wrong, their joints bending in directions that should have been impossible. And behind them, the Wendigo towered above the trees like a nightmare given flesh. Why do you fight? Its voice echoed in my skull. The hunger is part of you now. You can feel your body changing, becoming what it was always meant to be. Stop fighting and join your family. My family. That's what it called the soldiers. Its family of cannibals and monsters. The first one came through the window in an explosion of glass. It had been Sergeant Mills when it was alive, but now it was something else. Its jaw hung open too wide, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. Its fingers had grown into claws long enough to gut a man with one swipe. I lit a flare and shoved it into the creature's face. It screamed, the first real emotion I'd heard from any of them, and staggered backward. Where the fire touched its skin, the flesh sizzled and blackened. "Fire," I whispered. "It works." But there were 11 more coming through the windows and door. I threw the flare into my pile of fuel and dove for cover behind my overturned table. The explosion lit up the cabin like the sun, and the heat hit me like a physical blow. Every one of the dead soldiers screamed at once, a sound like all the pain in the world compressed into one horrible cry. Through the flames I could see them retreating, their bodies smoking and burning where the light touched them. But they weren't destroyed, just hurt, angry, more desperate than before. And the Wendigo itself was still out there. Clever, its voice said, and now it sounded amused. But fire burns out, fuel runs dry, and you are still becoming one of us, whether you fight or not. It was right. I could feel the changes accelerating, fed by the stress and fear. My spine was stretching, pulling my torso upward. My teeth were pushing through my gums, long and sharp and wrong. Worst of all, the smell of my own burning cabin was making me hungry. The fire was driving the monsters back, but it was also destroying my shelter, my supplies, my only protection against the winter. In a few hours, I'd be alone in the snow with nothing but the clothes on my back, and by then, I might not be human enough to care. That's when I remembered something else from the old stories. The Cherokee didn't just use fire to fight Wendigos. They used it to purify themselves, to burn away the contamination before it could take hold. I looked at my hands, at the claws that were pushing through my fingernails, at my arms, which were already too long, too thin, too much like the creature outside. The fire was hot enough to burn away what I was becoming, hot enough to hurt in ways that might shock my system back to humanity. I rolled up my sleeves and thrust both arms into the flames. The pain was beyond description. It felt like every nerve in my body was being torn apart and set on fire. I screamed until my throat was raw. But I held my arms in the flames until the smell of my own burning flesh filled the cabin. And something amazing happened. The hungry feeling stopped. For the first time in days, my stomach felt normal. My thoughts cleared. My teeth stopped growing and my spine snapped back to its normal length with an audible pop. The pain had broken the Wendigo's hold on me, but the fire was spreading and the cabin was collapsing around me. I had to get out before the whole place came down. I wrapped my burned arms in wet towels and stumbled outside into the snow. The cold hit my injuries like a hammer. But the pain kept me focused, kept me human. The Wendigo was waiting for me. It stood in the center of the clearing, taller than ever, its black eyes reflecting the flames behind me. The dead soldiers flanked it on both sides, but they kept their distance from the heat. "You think pain will save you?" it asked. "You think suffering will make you pure? Pain is just another kind of hunger, and I can teach you to feed on that too." It raised one impossibly long arm, and I felt something cold wrap around my mind. Not the hunger this time, something worse. The desire to hurt myself, to keep burning, to turn pain into pleasure until I couldn't tell the difference. I felt my feet moving toward the burning cabin, my body trying to walk back into the flames, not to purify myself, but to enjoy the sensation of burning alive. But I still had my rifle, and I still had one flare left. I lit the flare and fired it directly at the pile of propane tanks I'd placed in the cabin. The explosion blew out every window in the building and sent a column of fire 50 feet into the air. The heat was so intense that snow melted in a 100-foot radius around the cabin. The Wendigo shrieked and staggered backward, its form wavering like smoke in the heat. The dead soldiers collapsed, their bodies finally succumbing to the damage that should have killed them days ago. But the Wendigo itself wasn't destroyed, just diminished. "This is not over," it promised as it faded back into the tree. "The hunger lives in this place. It will always live here. And someday, someone else will come. Someone else will feed." Then it was gone, and I was alone with the burning remains of my life. I survived the rest of that winter, but barely. The explosion had destroyed everything: my cabin, my supplies, my radio. I spent the remaining weeks until spring in a shelter I built from the wreckage, living on whatever canned food I could salvage from the ruins. My arms healed badly, leaving scars that looked like twisted rope from wrist to elbow. But I was human. The burns had broken the Wendigo's hold completely, though I could still feel something empty inside me where the hunger had lived, like a tooth that's been pulled, leaving a hole that never quite stops aching. When the snow finally melted enough for rescue teams to reach me, I told them I'd had an accident with my heating system. Propane leak, explosion, lucky to be alive. They believed me because the alternative was impossible. I never went back to Ravens Peak. The Forest Service offered me early retirement with full benefits considering my injuries and the trauma of the accident. I took it and moved to Richmond, where I found a small apartment near the city center. I needed to be around people, lots of people, all the time. Being alone, even for a few hours, brought back the memory of that gnawing emptiness. But I kept files, maps of the peak, copies of old reports, newspaper clippings about missing hikers and hunting accidents in the area. The pattern was there if you knew how to look for it. Every few years, someone would go missing near Raven's Peak. Sometimes they'd find bodies that showed signs of animal attack. Sometimes they'd find evidence of cannibalism among survivor groups. The Wendigo was still there, still hunting, still spreading its hunger to anyone foolish enough to venture too close during the dark months of winter. I tried warning people. I wrote letters to park services, to hiking clubs, to survival schools. I told them to avoid the area during winter months, to never travel there alone, to be careful of unusual hunger or cravings if they did venture near the peak. Most people thought I was a crazy old man, traumatized by my accident. A few listened, but not enough. The worst part is that I understand now why the Wendigo's victims smile when they die. In those final moments, when the hunger finally consumes everything else, it doesn't hurt anymore. It feels good. It feels like coming home to something you never knew you were missing. I still wake up some nights with that gnawing feeling in my stomach. Not often, but enough to remind me that some hungers never really go away. They just sleep, waiting for the right conditions to wake up and start growing again. 3 months ago, I got a call from a young ranger stationed near Raven's Peak. He'd found my name in some old files and wanted to ask about unusual wildlife activity in the area. Hikers were reporting strange sounds at night, missing food supplies, and what one survivor called an overwhelming urge to eat something other than normal food. I told him what I always tell people who ask. Stay away from that mountain during winter. Don't go alone. Don't trust your own hunger if you feel it getting strange. And if you see something tall and thin watching you from the trees, run and don't look back. He laughed and said he'd keep it in mind. Last week, the same Park Service called to tell me they'd found his body, along with the bodies of 2 hikers he'd been trying to help. The official report listed it as a bear attack, but I know better. The Wendigo is still there, still waiting, still teaching people that some hungers can never be satisfied with ordinary food. And someday, when I'm too old and weak to keep fighting it, I know I'll go back to that mountain. Not to face the creature again, but because the empty place inside me will finally get too big to ignore. Because some hungers never die. They just wait, patient as winter, for their chance to feed again. I'm 71 years old now, and I can feel that patience wearing thin. 15 years I spent teaching survival in those mountains, and I thought starvation was just a technical problem to solve. Then I learned that some hunger never dies. Some hunger lives in the cold and the dark and the endless snow, waiting to teach others that the only food that really satisfies is the kind that screams when you bite it. Stay away from Raven's Peak, especially in winter. Trust me on this one. My name is Elizabeth Crowfoot, and I've been a forest ranger for 12 years now. People think my job is all about preventing forest fires and helping lost hikers, but that's not the whole truth. I work in cultural resource management, which means I protect old Native American sites from grave robbers and vandals. It's important work, even if it doesn't sound exciting. I'm 37 years old, and I used to be married, but that didn't work out. No kids either. Maybe that's for the best, considering what I deal with sometimes. Before I became a ranger, I studied anthropology in college. I learned about different cultures and how they bury their dead. That knowledge has helped me more times than I can count. The Daniel Boone National Forest in Kentucky is my territory. It's beautiful country, full of rolling hills and deep valleys. Most of it is peaceful, but some places feel different. Hell's Hollow is one of those places. Hell's Hollow sits 20,800 feet up in the mountains, tucked away where most people never go. You can't drive there. You have to hike for hours through thick woods just to find it. The valley is surrounded by tall rock walls that make it feel like nature's own prison. Even on sunny days, the place stays dark and cold. In September of 1981, I got called out there because of a university research team. They were doing an archaeological survey of Cherokee burial grounds. The Cherokee people used Hell's Hollow as a sacred burial place for hundreds of years before white settlers came. The university had permission from the Cherokee Nation to document the site, and my job was to make sure they followed all the rules about respecting Native American remains. The first thing I noticed when I hiked into Hell's Hollow was the fog. It hung thick and low, never lifting even when the sun was bright outside the valley. I could only see about 20 feet in any direction. The fog felt wrong somehow, like it was hiding something that didn't want to be found. Dr. Sarah Mitchell led the university team. She was a nice woman, maybe 10 years younger than me, with the kind of enthusiasm that comes from loving your work. Her graduate student, Tommy Barnes, was just a kid, maybe 22 years old and excited about his first real dig. "This site is incredible, Elizabeth," Dr. Mitchell told me on my first day there. "The burial patterns are unlike anything we've seen. The Cherokee people arranged the graves in specific geometric shapes. It's like they were creating some kind of map." That should have been my first warning. In 12 years of protecting burial sites, I'd learned that when ancient people did something unusual with their dead, there was always a reason, usually a very important reason. The team had set up camp near the center of the valley, close to where they found the most graves. They worked carefully, using small brushes and tools to uncover bones without damaging them. Everything looked normal at first. But as the days passed, I started noticing things that bothered me. The bones weren't where they should be. Cherokee burial practices were very specific. Bodies were placed facing east, with certain grave goods arranged in particular ways. But these bones had been moved around, not by animals or weather, but by human hands. Someone had been digging up the dead and putting them back in different positions. "Dr. Mitchell," I said one morning, "have you noticed that some of these remains look like they've been disturbed?" She looked up from where she knelt beside an open grave. "We thought that too at first, but the disturbance patterns are so old they might be part of the original burial ritual. Maybe the Cherokee people moved bones around for religious reasons we don't understand yet." That didn't feel right to me, but I couldn't argue with her expertise. She had more education than I did, and the Cherokee elders who gave permission for the dig hadn't mentioned anything unusual about the site. But I kept watching, and what I saw made my skin crawl. Every morning the bones would be in slightly different positions than where the team had left them the night before. Not dramatically different, just a little bit, like someone had picked them up and put them back down wrong. The graduate student Tommy noticed it too. "Miss Crowfoot," he whispered to me one evening as we sat around the campfire, "I swear those bones in Section 3 moved last night. I photographed everything before we covered it up, and this morning the skull was turned the other way." "Did you tell Dr. Mitchell?" I asked. He shook his head. "She'd think I was imagining things, but I know what I saw." I believed him. In my 12 years protecting sacred sites, I'd learned to trust my instincts, and my instincts were screaming that something was very wrong in Hell's Hollow. The fog never lifted. The temperature never warmed up, even though it was still early fall. And sometimes, when the wind blew through the valley, it sounded almost like voices whispering words I couldn't quite understand. On our 6th day in Hell's Hollow, we found the carved bones. Dr. Mitchell called me over to Section 7, where they'd been working on what looked like a family burial plot. 3 skeletons lay side by side, 2 adults and a child, probably buried together centuries ago. But these bones were different from all the others we'd found. Someone had carved intricate patterns into every single bone. Not just simple scratches, but detailed designs that looked like they'd been made by an artist. Spirals and symbols covered the skulls. The long bones of arms and legs had been turned into elaborate sculptures, carved with impossible precision. "Elizabeth, look at this craftsmanship," Dr. Mitchell said, her voice full of wonder. "These carvings are incredibly detailed. The Cherokee people must have had master bone carvers we never knew about." I knelt down next to the graves and looked closer. The carvings were beautiful, I had to admit, but something about them made my stomach turn. They didn't look like Cherokee work to me. The symbols were all wrong, twisted versions of patterns I'd seen in my anthropology studies. "How old do you think these carvings are?" I asked. Tommy was taking photographs from every angle. "They look ancient," he said. "The bone has that same aged color as all the other remains. These carvings have to be hundreds of years old." But I wasn't so sure. The carved lines looked too clean, too fresh. Ancient bone carving usually wore down over time, especially bone that had been buried in damp earth. These designs looked like they'd been made yesterday. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those carved bones and the feeling they gave me. Around midnight, I gave up trying to rest and decided to walk around the camp. The fog was thicker than usual, and I could barely see the tents just 20 feet away. I was walking toward the dig site when I heard it, a soft, scraping sound, like someone dragging a stick across stone. I stopped and listened. The sound came again, from the direction of Section 7, where we'd found the carved bones. My heart started beating faster. All the rules said I should wake up the others, but something made me want to investigate first. Maybe it was just an animal, and I didn't want to scare the university team over nothing. I pulled out my flashlight and walked slowly toward the sound. The beam cut through the fog, but I could only see a few feet ahead of me. The scraping sound continued, steady and rhythmic, like someone working on a craft project. When I reached Section 7, I could hardly believe what I saw. Tommy Barnes was kneeling beside the graves, but something was wrong with him. He was perfectly still, like a statue. His arms hung at his sides, and his head was tilted at an odd angle. The scraping sound was coming from the bones in the grave. They were moving. The carved bones were sliding across each other, rearranging themselves into new patterns. I watched in horror as a femur rolled over and aligned itself with a carved rib bone. The skull turned slowly until it faced directly up at the sky, all without anyone touching them. "Tommy?" I whispered. He didn't respond. I reached out and touched his shoulder. He was ice cold, and when I shook him gently, his head lolled forward like he was unconscious. But his eyes were open, staring down at the moving bones with a look of pure terror. The scraping sound stopped suddenly. All the bones went still at exactly the same moment. Tommy gasped and jerked backward, nearly knocking me over. "What happened?" he asked, his voice shaking. "I was in my tent, and then I was here. How did I get here?" I helped him stand up. His whole body was trembling. "What's the last thing you remember?" I asked. I was looking at the photographs I took today. I was studying the bone carvings, trying to figure out what they meant. Then I felt really tired, and I thought I'd just rest my eyes for a minute. He looked around frantically. "Why am I out here? Did I sleepwalk?" I didn't know what to tell him. I'd seen the bones move with my own eyes, but how could I explain that? Who would believe me? "Let's get you back to your tent," I said. "You probably just got confused in the fog." But as we walked away, I looked back at Section 7. In the beam of my flashlight, I could see that the bones had arranged themselves into a perfect spiral pattern. They looked like they were pointing towards something deeper in the valley, something hidden in the fog. The next morning, Dr. Mitchell was excited about a new discovery. During the night, someone had found another set of carved bones in Section 12, about 50 yards from where we'd been working. But these bones were different. They weren't ancient Cherokee remains at all. They were fresh, T. bones still had bits of dried flesh clinging to them, and they smelled like death. But they'd been carved with the same intricate patterns as the ancient bones. Someone had taken a recently dead person and turned their skeleton into art. "We need to call the police," I told Dr. Mitchell. "These bones are from someone who died recently. This might be a murder scene." She nodded, but she looked more fascinated than horrified. "The carving technique is identical to the ancient bones. Whoever did this has studied Cherokee burial practices extensively. The precision of the work is incredible." Tommy was quiet all morning. He kept staring at the new bones with a strange expression on his face. When I asked him if he was feeling all right, he just shook his head. "I keep having dreams," he told me quietly. "Dreams about someone carving bones while the person is still alive. I can hear them screaming, but I can't move or help them. It feels so real." I felt a chill run down my spine. Tommy, I think you should leave the valley today. Take a few days off. I can't, he said. I need to stay. I need to understand what the carvings mean. They're trying to tell us something important. That afternoon, while Dr. Mitchell hiked out to get cell phone signal and call the authorities, I stayed in camp with Tommy. The fog was getting thicker, and the temperature was dropping even though it was barely past noon. Tommy sat beside the fresh bones, studying them intently. He had his notebook out and was copying the carved symbols onto paper. "Elizabeth," he said without looking up, "these aren't just random designs, they're a map. Look at how the spirals connect to each other. They're showing us where to find something." I didn't want to look, but I couldn't help myself. The carvings did look like they might be pointing in specific directions. Some of the spirals seemed to flow toward the deeper part of the valley, where the fog was thickest. "Tommy, step away from those bones," I said. "Whatever killed that person might still be out there." But he wasn't listening to me anymore. He was tracing the carved patterns with his finger, following them like he was reading a book. His eyes had that same glazed look I'd seen the night before. "I understand now," he whispered. "They want us to come deeper into the valley. They want to show us the real burial ground." Dr. Mitchell never made it back to camp that first day. We found her body the next morning about half a mile from Hell's Hollow. She was lying on her back in a small clearing, her arms spread wide like she'd been arranged that way on purpose. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that she'd been carved. Someone had used a blade to cut intricate designs into her skin while she was still alive. The cuts were deep and precise, forming the same spiral patterns we'd been seeing on the bones. Her clothes were torn and bloody, but her face was peaceful, like she'd died smiling. Tommy found her first. I heard him screaming and ran to see what was wrong. When I saw Dr. Mitchell's body, I threw up. In 12 years of working in the forest, I'd seen plenty of death. Animal attacks, hunting accidents, heart attacks on the trail, but I'd never seen anything like this. "We have to get out of here," I told Tommy. "We have to leave right now." But Tommy was staring at Dr. Mitchell's body with that same fascinated expression he'd been wearing all week. "Look at the craftsmanship, Elizabeth. Look at how perfect the lines are. Whoever did this is an artist. Tommy, that's a dead person, a person we knew. How can you talk about her like she's a piece of art?" He looked up at me, and for a second his eyes seemed normal again. "You're right. I'm sorry. I don't know why I said that. Something's wrong with me." I helped him cover Dr. Mitchell's body with a tarp from our camp supplies. Then we tried to hike out of Hell's Hollow to get help, but something strange happened when we reached this edge of the valley. We couldn't leave. Every time we tried to climb up the rock walls that surrounded the valley, we'd get confused and turned around. We'd think we were heading up and out, but somehow we'd always end up back at the bottom, walking toward our camp. It was like the valley was playing tricks on our minds. "This is impossible," I said after our fourth failed attempt to escape. "I know these woods. I've been hiking here for over a decade. We should be able to find our way out." Tommy wasn't even trying anymore. He was sitting on a fallen log, drawing the carved symbols in his notebook. "Maybe we're not supposed to leave yet," he said. "Maybe we're supposed to find out what the carvings mean first." That night, neither of us slept. We sat by the fire and took turns keeping watch, but it didn't matter. Around midnight, I heard the scraping sounds again. This time, they were coming from multiple directions. It sounded like dozens of bones moving around in the fog. "Do you hear that?" I whispered to Tommy. He nodded, but he didn't look scared anymore. He looked excited. "They're calling to us, the bone carvers. They want to show us their workshop. Tommy, listen to me. Whatever's happening here isn't natural. Dr. Mitchell is dead, and we need to focus on getting out alive." But Tommy was already standing up, walking toward the sounds. "I have to see, Elizabeth. I have to understand what they're creating." I grabbed my flashlight and followed him. We walked deeper into Hell's Hollow than we'd ever gone before, following the scraping sounds through the thick fog. The air got colder with each step, and I could smell something rotten, like meat that had been left in the sun too long. After about 10 minutes of walking, we found the source of the sounds. It was a workshop. Someone had cleared out a natural depression in the valley floor and turned it into a carving studio. Hundreds of human bones were arranged in neat piles. Skulls in one area, arm bones in another, leg bones in a third. Fresh bones mixed with ancient ones, all of them, carved with the same intricate patterns. And in the center of the workshop, someone was still working. I couldn't see who it was at first. The figure was hunched over a carving table made from a flat boulder, using tools I couldn't identify to work on what looked like a human rib cage. The scraping sound was coming from whatever they were using to carve the bone. Tommy walked straight toward the figure like he was in a trance. I tried to grab his arm, but he shrugged me off. "Excuse me," he called out. "We'd like to see your work." The figure stopped carving and looked up. It wasn't human. The thing had once been a person, maybe a long time ago, but something had happened to change it. Its skin was gray and dried out, stretched tight over bones that looked too long. Its fingers had grown into claws about 6 inches long, sharp enough to carve bone. Its eyes were completely black, like looking into deep water at night. When it smiled at us, I could see that its teeth had been filed into points. "Welcome," it said in a voice like wind through dead leaves. "I have been waiting for you. I saw you studying my earlier works, and I knew you would appreciate my art." Tommy stepped closer to the thing. "You're the bone carver. You made all those beautiful designs." "Beautiful, yes. Each bone tells a story. Each carving captures a soul." The creature picked up the rib cage it had been working on. "This one belonged to your friend, the archaeologist. She had such passion for understanding the dead. Now she is part of my collection forever." It was Dr. Mitchell's rib cage. I recognized the break in one of the ribs from an old injury she'd told us about. The thing had carved delicate flower patterns into every bone. "You killed her," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I transformed her," the creature corrected. "Death is temporary. Art is eternal. She will never be forgotten now. Ami was looking around at all the carved bones with wonder. "How long have you been creating this art?" "Centuries. I was once like you, a person who came to study the Cherokee graves. But I learned that the dead have so much more to offer than dusty history. They can become masterpieces." The thing stood up, and I could see it was at least 7 feet tall. Its joints moved wrong, like they'd been taken apart and put back together incorrectly. "The Cherokee people buried their dead here because this place is special," it continued. "The boundary between life and death is thin in this valley. I learned how to cross that boundary, how to bring the dead back to serve my vision." All around us, the piles of carved bones began to move. Skeletons assembled themselves from the scattered remains, standing up to surround us. But these weren't normal skeletons. Every bone had been carved with those spiral patterns, and the carvings glowed with a faint blue light. "My servants," the creature said proudly. "Each one a work of art, each one happy to serve their creator forever." I counted at least 20 skeletons. Some looked ancient, probably Cherokee people who'd been buried here long ago. Others looked more recent. Hikers, hunters, maybe other researchers like Dr. Mitchell. All of them had been turned into the creature's twisted art collection. "Now I have a choice to make," the creature said, looking back and forth between Tommy and me. "Which of you will be my next masterpiece?" Tommy stepped forward without hesitation. "Choose me. I want to be part of your collection." I grabbed his arm and pulled him back. "Tommy, no, that thing killed Dr. Mitchell. It wants to kill us too." But Tommy shook his head. "You don't understand, Elizabeth. Look at all this beautiful art. Look at how the carvings make the bones come alive. This is the most important archaeological discovery in history." The creature laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Your friend understands the value of my work, but I think I will choose you, Forest Ranger. You have protected burial grounds for so many years. You understand the sacred nature of bones." The skeleton servants started moving closer. I could hear their carved bones clicking together as they walked. The blue glow from their carvings was getting brighter, and I realized the light was coming from inside the bones, like something was trapped in there. "The Cherokee people who were buried here," I said, backing away slowly. You took their spirits and trapped them in carved bones. I gave them purpose, the creature corrected. Instead of rotting in the ground, they became art. Instead of being forgotten, they became eternal. But I was starting to understand something important. In my anthropology studies, I'd learned about Cherokee burial practices. The Cherokee people believed that spirits needed to be properly released to find peace in the afterlife. If their bodies were disturbed or their burial rituals interrupted, their spirits would be trapped in the world of the living. This creature had been trapping spirits for centuries, turning them into slaves. That's why the carved bones moved. They weren't just art, they were prisons. You're not an artist, I told the creature. You're a torturer. You've been keeping these people trapped, forcing them to serve you against their will. The creature's black eyes narrowed. You know nothing about art. But you will learn. When I carve your bones while you're still alive, when I trap your spirit in beautiful patterns that will last forever, then you will understand. It started walking toward me, those 6-inch claws extending from its fingers. The skeleton servants moved to block any escape route. I was trapped in the middle of the bone workshop, surrounded by the creature's victims. But then I remembered something else from my studies. Cherokee burial grounds were sacred because they were blessed by tribal shamans. The spiritual power of the place was supposed to protect the dead and help their spirits find peace. The creature had corrupted that power, turned it twisted and wrong. But maybe the original blessing was still there, buried under centuries of evil. "Tommy," I called out, "your notebook. Do you still have the rubbings you made of the Cherokee symbols from the legitimate burial sites?" He looked confused but pulled out his notebook. "Yes, why?" "The real Cherokee symbols, not the carved ones this thing made. Show them to the spirits. Remind them what they're supposed to look like." Tommy opened his notebook and held up his drawings of the authentic Cherokee burial symbols. The skeleton servants stopped moving. The blue glow in their bones flickered like candles in the wind. "What are you doing?" the creature snarled. "My servants, seize them!" But the skeletons weren't moving anymore. They were looking at Tommy's drawings with what might have been recognition. The authentic Cherokee symbols were reminding them of who they used to be. I started reciting what I could remember of Cherokee funeral prayers from my anthropology classes. My pronunciation was probably terrible, and I didn't know all the words, but I tried to honor the spirits the way they deserved to be honored. The creature let out a shriek of rage and lunged at me with its claws extended. But one of the skeleton servants, an ancient Cherokee warrior based on the style of his carved burial goods, stepped between us. The warrior grabbed the creature's wrists with his bony hands. "You will not harm her," the warrior said, his voice echoing from inside his carved bones. "She shows respect for the dead." More skeleton servants began to turn against their creator. They formed a circle around the creature, trapping it the same way it had trapped their spirits. The blue glow in their bones was changing, becoming warmer and brighter. "No!" the creature screamed. "You are mine. I made you beautiful. I gave you purpose." But the Cherokee warrior shook his head. "You gave us slavery. She offers us peace." The warrior looked at me, and somehow I could see kindness in his empty eye sockets. "Finish it, protector of sacred places. Send us home." I continued the funeral prayers, speaking as clearly and respectfully as I could. As I spoke, the blue glow began to fade from the carved bones. One by one, the skeleton servants crumbled to dust, their spirits finally free to continue their journey to the afterlife. The creature fought desperately, but without its servants to help it, it was outnumbered. The Cherokee warrior held it still while I completed the prayers. "This place is sacred," I said in my strongest voice. "These people deserve respect, not slavery. Their spirits deserve peace, not imprisonment." The creature's form began to waver, like it was made of smoke instead of flesh and bone. "You don't understand," it whispered. "I was trying to make them eternal." I was trying to save them from being forgotten. By torturing them for centuries? I asked. By turning them into your personal slaves? That's not salvation. That's damnation. The creature looked around at the piles of carved bones that were slowly crumbling to dust. Its workshop was falling apart as the spiritual energy that powered it was released. My art, my beautiful art, was never yours to create, the Cherokee warrior said. These bones belong to people with families, with names, with stories. You stole all of that from them. The creature let out one final shriek before it collapsed into a pile of gray ash. The wind blew through Hell's Hollow and scattered the ash into the fog, erasing the last traces of its existence. The Cherokee warrior was the last to go. As his bones began to crumble, he looked at me one more time. Thank you, he said simply. The sacred ground is clean now. We can rest. And then he was gone, joining his people in whatever comes after this life. Tommy and I found ourselves alone until Hell's Hollow as the sun rose the next morning. The fog was finally lifting, and we could see the valley clearly for the first time. Without the creature's evil influence, it looked like what it was supposed to be, a peaceful resting place for people who had lived and died centuries ago. The Cherokee burial sites were still there, but now the bones lay in proper positions, facing east according to traditional burial practices. All the carved bones had crumbled to dust, taking the creature's corrupt art with them. Only the legitimate Cherokee grave goods remained, pottery, tools, and jewelry that families had buried with their loved ones. We were able to hike out of the valley without any problems. The confusing paths and wrong turns had been part of the creature's power to trap visitors. With that power broken, Hell's Hollow was just another mountain valley. When we reached civilization, we called the authorities and reported Dr. Mitchell's death. Her body was found exactly where we'd left it, but the carved wounds on her skin had healed over, leaving only faint scars. The medical examiner ruled her death a heart attack, probably brought on by getting lost in the woods and panicking. Tommy spent 3 days in the hospital being treated for exhaustion and exposure. When he was released, he couldn't remember much about what had happened in Hell's Hollow. The doctors said trauma sometimes caused memory loss. I didn't try to remind him of the details. Some things are better forgotten. The university canceled their archaeological survey and sealed their research files. Officially, Hell's Hollow was closed to researchers because of cultural sensitivity concerns raised by the Cherokee Nation. Unofficially, I think the Cherokee elders knew something had been wrong with the place and were grateful to have it cleaned up. I kept working as a forest ranger, but I specialized more and more in protecting Native American burial sites. The Cherokee Nation gave me honorary status as a cultural protector, which meant I could learn proper burial rituals and prayers. I wanted to be prepared if I ever encountered another corrupted sacred site. 3 years later, I was promoted to head of cultural resource management for the entire Daniel Boone National Forest. It was an important job with good pay, but that wasn't why I took it. I took it because it gave me the authority to protect places like Hell's Hollow from people who didn't understand how dangerous it could be to disturb the dead without proper respect. I visit Hell's Hollow twice a year now, in the spring and fall, to make sure the Cherokee burial ground stays peaceful. I bring tobacco and sage as offerings, and I say prayers in Cherokee to honor the people who rest there. The valley stays foggy sometimes, but it's natural fog now, not the supernatural darkness that used to trap spirits. Tommy went back to school and finished his graduate degree, but he switched from archaeology to library science. He said he preferred working with books instead of digging up the past. He sent me a letter once, saying he sometimes had dreams about carved bones, but he couldn't remember where the dreams came from. Dr. Mitchell's death was ruled accidental, and her family held a nice funeral for her back in Ohio. I attended the service and met her parents. They were proud of the work she'd done studying Native American culture, and they appreciated that I'd tried to keep her safe during the survey. I didn't tell them what really happened. Some truths are too heavy for grieving parents to carry. The Cherokee Nation asked me to help protect other burial sites across the region. Over the years, I found 3 more places where someone had been disturbing Native American graves, though none as seriously corrupted as Hell's Hollow. Each time I worked with Cherokee spiritual leaders to perform proper cleansing ceremonies and make sure the dead could rest in peace. I never married again or had childs. Ren. My job became my family, and the burial sites became my responsibility. It's not the life I planned when I was young, but it's the life that chose me after what happened in Hell's Hollow. Sometimes, on quiet nights in the forest, I think about the Cherokee warrior who saved my life. I wonder what his name was when he was alive, what stories he could have told about his people and their traditions. The creature that trapped him never cared about those details. It only saw his bones as raw material for its twisted art. But that's the difference between archaeology and grave robbing, between respect and exploitation. When you study the dead, you have to remember that they were once living people with hopes and fears, and families who loved them. They deserve to rest in peace, not to be turned into someone else's idea of art. Sacred ground stays sacred only as long as someone remembers why it matters. Violate the dead, and they'll teach you the difference between archaeology and desecration. I learned that lesson in Hell's Hollow, and I'll carry it with me for the rest of my life. The fog still rolls through those mountains sometimes, but it's clean fog now, natural and harmless. And when the wind blows through Hell's Hollow, it doesn't sound like whispered voices anymore. It sounds like peace. My name is Daniel Wolfhart, and I've been a park ranger for 20 years. Most folks think they know what darkness looks like, but they're wrong. Real darkness isn't just the absence of light, it's something that moves, breathes, and hunts. I work nights in the Great Smoky Mountains of Tennessee. My grandmother was Cherokee, and she taught me things the Park Service manual never covered. How to walk so quiet that deer don't lift their heads. How to read animal tracks in moonlight. How to feel when something wrong is watching you from the trees. Midnight Ridge sits at 3,600 feet, trapped between 2 taller peaks. The sun never touches it directly, not even in summer. In winter, with the thick clouds we get, that place stays dark for weeks at a time. The Cherokee called it a thin place, somewhere the spirit world pushes through. Later, during the Civil War, they executed deserters up there. The ground soaks up violence like a sponge soaks up water. December 1992 was the worst winter I'd ever seen. Snow came early and stayed late. The clouds hung so low you could almost touch them, blocking out the moon and stars. Most nights, you couldn't see your hand in front of your face without a flashlight. That's when the hikers started talking. First, it was just stories around the ranger station coffee pot. A family from Atlanta said something followed them down the trail. No sounds, no footprints, just the feeling of being watched by something that shouldn't exist. They kept looking over their shoulders and seeing shapes that looked like people, but when they shined their lights, nothing was there. "Probably just bears," said Ranger Mills. He was new, only 2 years on the job. Bears can walk on their back legs. Looks human from a distance. But I knew bears. Bears make noise. Bears smell like bears. These hikers described something different, something that moved without sound and had no smell at all. Something that cast shadows even when there was no light to cast them. The reports kept coming. A group of college kids said shadows chased them off the ridge. Not regular shadows, shadows that moved like people but had no bodies to make them. Shadows that got closer every time they stopped to rest. I should have paid more attention to what my grandmother used to say. When shadows start walking by themselves, it means the dead are trying to come back. 3 nights before the winter solstice, I got the call that changed everything. "Daniel, we need you up on Midnight Ridge," the dispatcher's voice crackled through my radio. "Missing hiker last seen yesterday afternoon. Name's Jennifer Walsh, 25 years old, experienced backpacker." I loaded my gear and headed up the mountain. The temperature was dropping fast, maybe down to 15 degrees. Without shelter, Jennifer had maybe 6 hours before hypothermia killed her. The trail to Midnight Ridge winds through thick pine forest. During the day, it's just challenging. At night, in winter, it becomes a maze. Every tree looks the same. Every rock formation could be hiding anything. Your flashlight beam only reaches about 20 feet, and beyond that, the world disappears into nothing. I'd walked this trail hundreds of times, but something felt different that night. The usual forest sounds were missing. No owls, no rustling in the underbrush. Even my footsteps seemed too loud, like the whole mountain was holding its breath. About halfway up, I found Jennifer's backpack hanging from a tree branch 8 feet off the ground. No way she could have hung it there herself. No way the wind could have blown it that high. And there were no boot prints in the snow around the tree. Not hers. Not anyone else's. I radioed for backup and kept climbing. The ridge was still 2 miles away, but already I could feel it pulling at me. The darkness up there wasn't natural. It was thick, like black water, and it seemed to move on its own. My flashlight started flickering. Brand new batteries, but the beam kept getting weaker. By the time I reached the ridge, I was down to a dim yellow glow that barely lit the ground at my feet. That's when I saw my first shadow walker. It stood about 30 feet away, near the edge of the tree line. Human-shaped, but wrong. Too tall, too thin, and completely black. Not black like someone wearing dark clothes. Black like a hole cut out of the world. I shined my dying flashlight at it. The beam went right through like it was made of smoke. But when I looked away from my light, the thing was solid again. It had no face, just a smooth, dark surface where features should be. For maybe 10 seconds, we stared at each other. Then it started walking toward me. I've faced down bears, mountain lions, and drunk hunters with guns. I know what fear feels like. This was different. This was terror so deep it made my bones ache. Every instinct I had screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The shadow person, that's what I started calling them, moved without sound. Its feet didn't disturb the snow. It cast no shadow of its own, even though my flashlight should have thrown one on the ground behind it. When it got within 10 feet, my flashlight died completely. The cold hit me like a physical blow. Not winter cold. This was the cold of deep space, of death itself. My breath came out in thick clouds and ice started forming on my jacket. I fumbled for my backup flashlight. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped it. The moment the beam came on, the shadow person vanished. Just gone, like it was never there. But the cold remained. I called out for Jennifer, my voice echoing off the rocks. No answer. I searched for 2 hours, working in careful grid patterns, stopping every few minutes to listen. The whole time I felt like something was watching me from just outside my light. I found her at dawn. Jennifer Walsh was sitting against a tree, legs stretched out in front of her, head tilted back. Her eyes were wide open, staring at the sky. Her face was frozen in an expression of absolute terror, mouth open, like she'd been screaming when she died. But here's the thing that made no sense. The temperature that night had been around 15 degrees. Cold enough to kill, sure, but Jennifer was frozen solid. Her body was hard as stone, like she'd been in a deep freeze for weeks. Her skin was white as paper, and when I touched her hand to check for a pulse, it felt like touching ice. The medical examiner later said she'd died of hypothermia, but he couldn't explain why she'd frozen so completely in such a short time. He also couldn't explain why there were no signs of struggle, no evidence that she'd tried to build shelter or stay warm. She'd just sat down and died. But I saw something the medical examiner missed. In the snow around Jennifer's body, there were marks, not footprints, more like places where the snow had been pressed down by something heavy. The marks formed a perfect circle around her, about 10 feet across, as if something had been walking around and around her while she died. I radioed for a recovery team and started taking pictures. Through the camera lens, I noticed something else. Jennifer's shadow was wrong. The morning sun was hitting her from the east, which should have thrown her shadow to the west. Instead, her shadow stretched north toward the deepest part of the ridge, and it was moving. Not much, just a slight shifting back and forth, like it was trying to pull away from her body. I blinked and looked again. The shadow was normal, but I knew what I'd seen. The recovery team arrived around noon. 4 rangers, 2 paramedics, and a deputy sheriff. We loaded Jennifer onto a stretcher and started down the mountain. professional, efficient, just another wilderness fatality. Except rangers. Mills and Patterson kept stopping, looking over their shoulders. "You guys hear that?" Mills asked, after we'd been hiking for about an hour. We all stopped and listened. Nothing but wind in the trees. "Hear what?" asked the deputy. "Footsteps," Mills said. "Like someone walking behind us, matching our pace." Patterson nodded. "I heard it too. Every time we stop, it stops." We spent 5 minutes standing there, listening to nothing but our own breathing. But when we started moving again, I heard it too. The soft crunch of footsteps in snow, always about 20 feet behind us. I turned around 3 times. Nothing there but trees and shadows. By the time we reached the bottom of the mountain, 2 of the paramedics were complaining that their equipment kept malfunctioning. Radio batteries dying, flashlights flickering. The stretcher kept getting caught on things that weren't there. "Weirdest damn rescue I've ever been on," one of them muttered. That night I drove home to my cabin and tried to forget what I'd seen on the ridge. I told myself Jennifer had gotten lost, panicked, and died of exposure. The shadow person was just my imagination, stress and darkness playing tricks on me. But at 3 in the morning, I woke up because my bedroom was freezing cold. The heater was running, but ice was forming on the inside of my windows. My breath came out in thick clouds. And there, in the corner by my dresser, a shadow darker than the rest was slowly taking the shape of a person. I grabbed the pistol from my nightstand and turned on the bedside lamp. The shadow vanished, but the cold remained for another hour. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. The next morning, I drove back to the ranger station to file my report. The coffee was hot, the heater was working, and everything felt normal again. I almost convinced myself I'd dreamed the whole thing. Then Ranger Patterson didn't show up for work. His wife called around noon. "Tom never came home last night," she said, her voice tight with worry. "He was supposed to pick up groceries after his shift, but he never shot. Who had his truck still in the parking lot?" We found his footprints leading from the parking lot toward Midnight Ridge. Just his prints going up the trail, none coming back down. About a mile up, we found his ranger hat hanging from a tree branch, 10 feet off the ground, just like Jennifer's backpack. The footprints continued for another half mile, then stopped. Not gradually, like he'd reached hard ground. They just ended, mid-stride, like Tom Patterson had vanished into thin air. "Could have been an animal attack," said Mills, but his voice shook. "Mountain lion, maybe." "Mountain lions don't hang hats in trees," I said. We searched until dark. No body, no blood, no signs of struggle. Tom Patterson had simply disappeared. That night I stayed at the station to monitor the radio and coordinate search teams. Around midnight, static crackled through the emergency channel. "Help me!" The voice was faint, barely audible through the white noise. "Tom, is that you?" I grabbed the radio. "Tom, what's your location?" "So cold. Can't move." "They're all around me." "Tom, key your mic twice if you can hear me." Nothing but static. I tried for an hour to re-establish contact. Finally, around 1 a.m., the voice came through again, clearer this time. "Daniel, don't come up here. They're not people." Then silence. I called for backup and headed up the mountain alone. I know that was stupid, but Tom was my friend. We'd worked together for 5 years. His kids called me Uncle Daniel. The trail felt different than it had the night before. Colder, darker. My flashlight kept dimming even with fresh batteries. Twice I heard footsteps behind me. When I turned around, I caught glimpses of human-shaped shadows moving between the trees. But they were always just outside my light. I found Tom about 2 miles up, in a small clearing I'd never seen before. He was standing in the center, perfectly still, arms at his sides. His ranger jacket was covered in frost, and his face was pale as snow. "Tom!" I ran toward him. "Tom, are you okay?" He didn't respond. As I got closer, I could see his breath coming out in small white puffs. He was alive, but barely. His eyes were wide open, staring at something I couldn't see. "Tom, it's Daniel. Can you hear me?" He turned his head toward me, moving like his joints were frozen. When he spoke, His voice sounded like it was coming from far away. "They want my shadow," he whispered. "They said they'll let me go if I give them my shadow." "Tom, you're hypothermic. We need to get you off this mountain." "Look around, Daniel. Really look." I turned my flashlight in a slow circle. The beam revealed shapes standing at the edge of the clearing. Shadow people, maybe a dozen of them, perfectly still, waiting. My light passed over them without effect. They were solid darkness, human-shaped holes in the world. "They've been here for hours," Tom said, "talking to me, telling me things." "What kind of things?" "About the people who died here. Cherokee warriors killed by soldiers. Soldiers killed by Cherokee. Everyone who ever died violent on this mountain. They don't rest, Daniel. They can't rest. And they're hungry." The temperature dropped another 10 degrees. Ice began forming on my jacket. One of the shadow people stepped forward. This one was different from the others, taller, more solid-looking. When it moved, the air around it shimmered like heat waves, but cold instead of hot. It spoke without a mouth, its voice coming from everywhere at once. "You brought us fresh life," it said. "We thank you." "Tom, we're leaving. Now." I grabbed his arm. The moment I touched him, pain shot up my hand like an electric shock. Tom's skin was cold as ice, but underneath I could feel something moving, something trying to pull away. His shadow. It was trying to separate from his body. "I can't leave," Tom whispered. "If I try to leave, they'll take it by force, and then I'll be like them." "Take what?" "My shadow. They feed on shadows, Daniel, on the life that casts them. Each person they consume makes them stronger." The lead shadow person moved closer. I could feel its presence like a weight pressing down on my chest. "Give us the shadow freely and the flesh may go," it said. "Resist, and we take both." "How many people have you killed?" I asked. "Killed?" The thing sounded amused. "We do not kill, we preserve. All who died here live within us now. The Cherokee boy who bled out with 3 bullets in his chest. The Confederate soldier who froze to death in these woods. They are part of us forever." Tom looked at me with desperate eyes. "They showed me things, Daniel. Memories of everyone who ever died on this mountain. I felt their fear, their pain, their last moments. And I understood death isn't the end. It's just different." I tried to pull Tom toward the tree line, but he wouldn't move. His feet seemed rooted to the spot. "Tom, listen to me. Whatever these things are, they're lying. Don't trust them. Look at your own shadow, Daniel." I looked down. My shadow stretched across the snow cast by my flashlight beam. But it was moving wrong, like it was trying to walk in a different direction than my body. The shadow people began closing in. "Choose quickly," the leader said. "Dawn comes in 3 hours. If you are still here when the sun rises, the choice will be made for you." That's when I remembered my grandmother's stories about Cherokee light ceremonies, about how the old warriors would drive away evil spirits with sacred fire. I also remembered the emergency flares in my backpack. "Tom, when I give the signal, run for the trees. Don't look back, don't stop. Get off this mountain." "What about you?" "I'm going to buy us some time." I pulled out a road flare and struck it against the igniter. Red fire blazed to life, 10 times brighter than my flashlight. Gah! The shadow people recoiled, their forms becoming less solid. "Run!" Tom stumbled toward the tree line. I followed, holding the flare high, sweeping it back and forth. The shadow people circled us like wolves, staying just outside the light. We made it maybe 50 yards before Tom collapsed. "Can't feel my legs," he gasped. I looked down and saw the problem. His shadow was stretching behind us, still connected to his body but getting thinner, like taffy being pulled. The shadow people weren't chasing us. They were draining him from a distance. "They're taking it anyway," Tom whispered. "I can feel myself getting weaker." The flare was burning down. Maybe 2 minutes of light left. "I'm sorry, Daniel. Tell my family I tried to come home." Tom's shadow snapped like a broken rubber band. One moment it was there, the next it was flowing across the snow toward the shadow people like black water. Tom aged 20 years in 10 seconds. His hair went gray, his face wrinkled, his back bent. He gasped once, then crumpled to the ground, dead. The shadow people absorbed Tom's shadow into their forms, becoming more solid, more real. The leader turned toward me. "Now," it said, "we have use for you." My flare went out. In the sudden darkness, I felt them pressing close around me. The cold was so intense my lungs burned with each breath. I fumbled for another flare, but my hands were numb and clumsy. "You cannot run from us," the leader said. "This mountain belongs to the shadow now. Every death feeds us. Every soul lost here makes us stronger. What do you want?" "What we have always wanted. To return to the world of the living. For too long, we have been trapped in this thin place between life and death. But the barrier grows weak. Soon, we will walk in daylight again." I finally got another flare lit. The red light revealed dozens of shadow people now, more than before. They surrounded me in expanding circles like ripples on a dark pond. "Tom's death opened the way wider," the leader continued. "His life force, his terror, his despair, all of it feeds the Bree. Between worlds. By tomorrow's dawn, we will have enough strength to leave this place. And then what? You'll hunt people in the towns below? We will do what we have always done. We will collect the shadows of the living and add them to our number, one by one, until all humans cast shadows that serve us." I thought about Jennifer Walsh, frozen in terror, about Tom Patterson, aging to death in seconds, about all the other hikers who'd reported being stalked by moving shadows. "How many people have you killed?" "None. We do not kill. We preserve. Every soul we collect remains conscious within us forever. They experience every moment of every hunt. They feel every new victim's fear as if it were their own." The flare was burning down again. I had maybe 3 left. "You're insane. We are patient. We are eternal. And we are hungry." I looked around desperately, trying to remember everything my grandmother had taught me about Cherokee ceremonies, about the old ways of fighting evil spirits, sacred fire, tobacco, prayer, and one more thing, sacrifice. "The old Cherokee drove you back before," I said. "The old Cherokee knew the proper rituals. They fed us willing sacrifices to keep the breach sealed. But they are gone, and their children have forgotten the old ways. Not all of them." I pulled out my pouch of Red Man tobacco, the cheap stuff I chewed when I was nervous. Not exactly sacred, but tobacco was tobacco. "You think leaf and flame will save you?" The leader laughed, a sound like wind through dead trees. "The power in your blood runs thin. You are not warrior enough for such magic." Maybe not, but I was scared enough, and desperate enough, and angry enough. I scattered the tobacco in a circle around myself and lit the 3rd flare. This time I held it like a torch and began walking toward the largest group of shadow people. "In the name of my grandmother's people," I said, my voice stronger than I felt, "I command you back to the darkness that spawned you." The shadow people wavered but didn't retreat. "You have no power here," the leader said. "Maybe not, but I've got something you want." I looked down at my shadow, cast by the flare's red light. It was moving again, tugging away from my body like it wanted to join the others. "You want my shadow? Come and take it." I started running toward the deepest part of the ridge, the place where the mountain pressed closest to whatever dark dimension these things came from. The shadow people followed, flowing across the snow like spilled ink. Behind me, I could hear Tom's voice mixed in with the others, dozens of people, maybe hundreds, all crying out in voices that echoed from within the shadow collective. "Daniel, don't let them take you. Run. Save yourself." But I kept running deeper into their territory, leading them exactly where I wanted them. At the heart of Midnight Ridge, there's a clearing about 30 feet across. The Cherokee used it for ceremonies back when they still came to this mountain. Civil War soldiers used it for executions. It was a place where the barrier between worlds had been worn thin by centuries of death and violence. It was also where I'd stashed a case of emergency flares during my last supply run. I reached the clearing with my flare burning down to nothing. The shadow people surrounded me, cutting off all escape routes. There were so many now that they blocked out the spaces between the trees. An army of living darkness. "Clever," the leader said. "You led us to the heart of our power. Here, the breach between worlds is strongest. Here we can drain your shadow completely and use your life force to tear open a permanent doorway." Yeah, well, here's the thing about Cherokee sacred sites. I struck my last flare. They're sacred for a reason. I touched the flare to the supply box. 40 emergency flares went up at once, turning night into day. The light was incredible, bright as the sun, red as blood, hot as a furnace. The shadow. People shrieked and recoiled, their forms becoming transparent. Some of the smaller ones simply dissolved, but the leader and his core group held their ground. "Light alone will not banish us," he snarled. "We have fed on too much fear, absorbed too many souls. We are beyond your power to destroy." He was right. Even with all that light, I could see them starting to solidify again as their eyes adjusted. In a few minutes, they'd be as strong as ever. That's when I remembered the last part of my grandmother's stories, the part I'd hoped I wouldn't need. Cherokee light ceremonies didn't just use fire and tobacco. They used life force, the willing sacrifice of the person performing the ritual. I stepped into the center of the blazing flares and opened my arms. "You want my shadow?" I shouted. "You want my life force? Then take it all at once." I grabbed 2 of the burning flares and held them against my chest. The heat seared through my jacket, but I didn't let go. I started chanting in Cherokee, words my grandmother had taught me when I was 7 years old, words I'd never fully understood until now. "Spirits of darkness, I offer my life freely to seal the breach you have torn. By fire and blood and willing sacrifice, I bind you to the shadow world forever." The flares burned through my jacket and into my skin. Pain like nothing I'd ever felt shot through my body. But with the pain came something else. Power. Real power. The kind that comes from offering everything you have for the protection of others. Light began pouring out of my body. Not the red glow of the flares, but white light, pure as mountain snow. The shadow people screamed and writhed, their forms breaking apart like smoke in a hurricane. "No!" the leader roared. "We will not be banished again." He lunged toward me, his claws reaching for my throat. But the light was too strong. When he touched it, his entire form burst into flames. Not regular fire, but burning darkness that consumed him from within. One by one, the other shadow people followed their leader into dissolution. As they died, I heard voices, human voices, crying out in relief and gratitude. "Thank you. Free at last. Tell my family I love them." Tom's voice was among them. "Take care of yourself, Daniel. You did good." Then they were gone, and I was alone in the clearing with my burns and my failing strength and my flares burning down to nothing. The last thing I remember was feeling my shadow settle back against the ground where it belonged, solid and normal, and mine again. I woke up in Johnson City Medical Center 3 days later. Second-degree burns across my chest, severe hypothermia, and what the doctors called exhaustion of unknown origin. They said hikers found me unconscious in the snow and radioed for help. The official report listed Tom Patterson's death as a wilderness accident, exposure and hypothermia, same as Jennifer Walsh. The fact that his body looked like it had aged 40 years was attributed to unusual environmental factors. The missing persons reports filed by other families over the past few months were quietly closed. No one asked me about shadow people or Cherokee light ceremonies or burning flares in the middle of the night. But Chief Ranger Williams did pull me aside when I came back to work a month later. "Daniel, I want you to know that Midnight Ridge is being closed to public access indefinitely," he said. "We're calling it a geological survey, but between you and me, we've had too many incidents up there. Whatever's happening on that mountain, it's beyond our expertise." "Probably for the best," I said. "There's something else. The Cherokee Nation wants to meet with you, something about honoring a traditional obligation." The ceremony took place in February on the new moon. 15 Cherokee elders gathered in a circle around a sacred fire. They spoke in their own language for most of it, but the meaning was clear enough. They were giving me a title, Guardi, and of the thin place, a keeper of the barrier between worlds. "Your grandmother would be proud," said an old woman named Sarah Ridge. "You did what our warriors could not. You closed the breach permanently." Is it really closed? The shadow people are gone, sent back to the realm where they belong. But the place itself remains what it has always been, a thin spot where other worlds press close to ours. It will need watching. For how long? Forever. So that's what I do now. Every month, I hike up to Midnight Ridge alone. I check the old clearing where I perform the light ceremony. I listen to the wind in the trees and feel for any wrongness that might be trying to push through. Most of the time, everything's quiet. Normal. The mountain has gone back to being just a mountain, but sometimes on the darkest nights, I catch glimpses of shapes moving in the trees. Not shadow people, something else. Something that was waiting on the other side when I sealed the breach. Something that's still trying to find its way through. My shadow stays put now, solid and reliable as it should be. But I've aged more than the calendar says I should have. The life force I spent in that ritual came from somewhere, and I can feel the years it cost me in my bones and joints and the gray creeping into my hair. That's okay. It was worth it. Tom Patterson's family moved to Florida 6 months after he died. They invited me to the going-away party, and Tom's wife, Linda, pulled me aside. "I know the official report says exposure," she whispered. "But Tom called me that last night. He was terrified of something, talking about shadows that weren't shadows. I think you know more about what really happened than you're telling." "Mrs. Patterson, I don't need details, I just need to know. Did he suffer?" I thought about Tom's voice mixed in with the others as the shadow people dissolved, calling out but his thanks and his love for his family. "No, ma'am. When it was over, he was at peace." She nodded and never brought it up again. The hikers have started coming back to other parts of the mountain now that the missing persons reports have stopped. They stick to the marked trails and camp in designated areas, and so far we haven't had any more incidents. But I keep the emergency flares stocked, just in case. And every night when I go home to my cabin, I check my shadow in the lamplight to make sure it's still attached properly. Because you never know what's out there in the darkness, waiting for the barriers between worlds to grow thin again. And if they do, I'll be ready. After all, some jobs choose you instead of the other way around. 20 years ago, I thought I was just a park ranger who worked nights. Now I know I'm something else, a guardian standing watch between the world of the living and the realm of hungry shadows. It's not the retirement I planned, but it's the one I earned. And when people ask me about the strange things that happen in these mountains, I tell them what I told that reporter last month. Darkness and light are supposed to balance each other out. But some places tip too far toward one side or the other. When shadows start moving on their own, it's time to make your own light, and be prepared to feed it with everything you have. Most folks think I'm talking metaphorically. I let them think that. It's easier than explaining what really walks in the darkness between worlds and what it costs to keep them there. My name is Sarah Thornfield, and I've been a park ranger at George Washington National Forest for 9 years. People always ask me why I switched from being a pediatric nurse to working in the mountains of Virginia. The truth is, after spending so many years watching sick children fight for their lives in hospital beds, I needed to help kids experience something better, the joy of being outdoors, healthy and free. I specialize in family safety programs and youth wilderness education. Parents trust me to keep their children safe during camping trips and nature walks. I know every trail, every dangerous drop-off, every spot where a curious kid might wander off and get lost. At least, I thought I did. The Serpent Spine Ridge has always been my favorite area to work with families. It's a 200-foot formation of natural stone that winds through the forest like a giant snake. The rocks create amazing corridors and chambers that kids love to explore. The stone formations are so unique. Some say they look like a coiled serpent, which is how the ridge got its name. October 1976 was shaping up to be a busy month. Halloween was coming, and families wanted to experience the beautiful fall colors. The leaves were turning brilliant reds and golds, and the harvest moon was approaching. But there was something else coming too, a blood moon lunar eclipse that the local newspapers had been talking about for weeks. I should have paid more attention to the old stories about this place. Mrs. Henderson from the visitor center mentioned it one morning while I was filling out my weekly reports. You know, Sarah, the old-timers used to say some terrible things happened up on that ridge back in colonial times. What kind of things? I asked, not really listening. I was focused on planning a safety demonstration for a group of Boy Scouts. Witch trials, she said quietly. Back in the 160s, they say 13 children were accused of practicing witchcraft, burned them alive right up there on the ridge. I looked up from my paperwork. Children? Young ones, 6 to 13 years old. Of course, nowadays we know it was probably just adults looking for someone to blame for their troubles. But those poor babies, she shook her head, died screaming for their mothers, according to the stories. A chill ran down my spine, but I pushed it away. I'd lost my own daughter Emma to leukemia 2 years earlier. She was only 7 when she died, and hearing about children suffering in any time period still hurt. But old stories were just that. Stories. I should have listened more carefully. The first sign something was wrong came on a Tuesday morning. The Patterson family had been camping near the ridge for 3 days when Mr. Patterson called our office in a panic. My daughter Lucy has been having the strangest dreams, he said. She keeps talking about playing with other children up on the rock formations. Colonial children, she says, in old-fashioned clothes. This wasn't unusual. Kids often had vivid dreams when camping. New surroundings, ghost stories around the campfire. It was normal. Has she been reading any historical books lately? I asked. Sometimes learning about the past can influence dreams. That's the thing, Mr. Patterson said. She's describing things we never taught her. She woke up this morning speaking in some kind of old English, and she drew pictures of children in pilgrim clothes being tied to stakes. Now I was paying attention. Lucy was 8 years old. Where would she learn about witch trials? I'll come check on your family this afternoon, I told him. When I arrived at their campsite, Lucy Patterson was sitting by the fire, drawing. Her parents looked exhausted, like they hadn't slept in days. Lucy, honey, I said, kneeling beside her. Your dad tells me you've been having some interesting dreams. She looked up at me with serious brown eyes. They're not dreams, Miss Sarah. The burned children want to play. They've been waiting so long to have friends. She held up her drawing. It showed 13 children in colonial clothing standing in a circle. Their faces were blackened, their clothes were burned, but they were holding hands and smiling. At the bottom of the page, in careful letters, she had written, "They want us to join their game before the red moon comes." I felt my stomach drop. Lucy Patterson had never been taught about the witch trials. Her parents confirmed it. They didn't even know the history of this area. Lucy, where did you learn about these children? I asked gently. They told me, she said simply. They come visit when the moon is bright. They're lonely. They want to play with children who are still alive because they never got to grow up. Mr. Patterson pulled me aside. She's been talking like this for 2 days. And it's not just dreams anymore. She talks to empty air during the day, too. Yesterday, she told us she was playing hide and seek with Mercy and Thankful and Remember. Those sound like colonial names to me. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about Lucy's drawing. Something about the way she described the children felt too real, too detailed. I decided to do some research. In the local historical society's dusty archives, I found the truth that Mrs. Henderson had only hinted at. In October 1692, 13 children aged 6 to 13 had indeed been accused of witchcraft in the area that was now Serpent's Spine Ridge. Their names were listed in faded ink. Mercy Whitmore, age 6. Thankful Adams, age 7. Remember Johnson, age 8. The same names Lucy Patterson had mentioned. According to the records, the children were accused by the local minister of dancing with the devil and speaking in tongues. The real reason became clear as I read deeper. Several adult men in the community had been abusing these children. When the children tried to tell Tibiet's parents, the men claimed the children were possessed by evil spirits. The community believed the men instead of the children. On October 31st, 1692, all 13 were tied to stakes on the ridge and burned alive. The records described their final moments in horrifying detail. They cried for their mothers. They begged for mercy. They died innocent. I closed the heavy book, feeling sick. No wonder this place felt wrong sometimes. Those poor children had died in terror and injustice, but that was almost 300 years ago. Dead was dead, or so I thought. The next morning I got another call. This time it was the Morrison family. Ranger Thornfield? Our son Tommy has been acting very strange since we started camping here. He's speaking in an old-fashioned way, and he keeps talking about playing with colonial children. But here's the really weird part. He's showing knowledge of historical events that he never learned in school. My heart started racing. What kind of knowledge? He told us all about how the serpent's spine got its name. He said the colonial people thought the ridge looked like a giant snake, and that's why they chose it as a place to burn witches. He said fire and serpents were both symbols of the devil to them. I hadn't found that information in any of my research, but it made sense. He also drew a map, Mrs. Morrison continued. A detailed map of stone formations on the ridge that shows secret passages we never knew existed. We followed the map yesterday, and all the passages were exactly where he drew them. After I hung up, I sat in my office staring at the phone. 2 families, 2 children, both having the same type of experiences. I needed to see this for myself. That afternoon, I hiked up to Serpent Spine Ridge alone. It was a beautiful October day, but as I climbed higher, I noticed the temperature dropping. By the time I reached the main stew and formations, I could see my breath. The ridge was exactly as I remembered. Massive stone corridors and chambers that twisted through the mountain like the inside of a snake. But now I noticed something I'd never paid attention to before. Certain areas were much colder than others, spots where children claimed to play with their colonial friends. I took out my thermometer and checked. The main trail was 62 degrees. But in the stone chamber where Lucy Patterson said she played hide and seek, it was 38 degrees, cold enough to preserve things that should have rotted away centuries ago. That's when I found the toys. In a small stone alcove, partially buried under leaves, I discovered an impossible collection. Corn husk dolls that looked handmade and ancient, glass marbles from different time periods, a wooden top that seemed hundreds of years old, and sitting right next to them, a plastic G.I. Joe figure from 1975. Children's toys from across the centuries, buried together like they'd been played with yesterday. I heard laughter behind me. I turned around, expecting to see campers, but the stone corridor was empty. The laughter came again, high, sweet voices of children playing. But there was something underneath it that made my skin crawl, a sound like crackling fire. "Hello?" I called out. The laughter stopped. I waited for several minutes but heard nothing else. Just as I was about to leave, I felt something brush against my hand. I looked down and saw a small corn husk doll that hadn't been there moments before. It was warm to the touch, as if it had just been held by living hands. That evening, I called my supervisor to report what I'd found. Before I could finish describing the toy collection, he interrupted me. "Sarah, we have a bigger problem. The Kelly's boy Marcus went missing during their evening hike. He's 10 years old. The family says he just wandered off while they were setting up camp." My blood went cold. "Where were they camping?" "Base of Serpent's Spine Ridge. We've got search teams heading out now." I grabbed my gear and drove to the campsite as fast as I could. The Kelly family was frantic. Mr. Kelly was a big man, but he was crying as he described what happened. Marcus just walked away from us. We were unloading the car, and when we looked up, he was walking toward the ridge like he was following someone. We called his name, but he didn't answer. He kept walking like he was in a trance. Mrs. Kelly grabbed my arm. He'd been having dreams too, just like the other children, about colonial kids who wanted to play with him. He said they told him there was going to be a special game during the red moon. I felt like ice water was running through my veins. The blood moon eclipse was only 3 days away. We searched through the night with flashlights and called Marcus's name until our voices were hoarse. As the hours passed, I started to fear the worst. The ridge was dangerous at night. There were cliff drops and hidden crevices where a child could fall and be seriously injured. At dawn, we found him. Marcus Kelly was sitting at the base of a tall rock formation, completely unharmed but changed. When his parents ran to him, he looked at them with ancient, sad eyes. "The burned children showed me the secret places," he said in a voice that sounded too old for his body. "They've been waiting so long for friends. They want us to play with them when the red moon makes them strong enough." His parents hugged him and cried with relief, but I noticed something that made my stomach turn. In Marcus's hand was a small wooden doll, charred black as if it had been in a fire. And when he stood up, I saw that his brown hair had streaks of white in it, like he'd aged years in a single night. But the most terrifying thing was what he whispered to me as his parents led him away. "Miss Sarah, they know about your little girl, Emma. They want to help you see her again." The news about Marcus Kelly spread quickly through our small community. By the next morning, I had received calls from 6 more families reporting strange behavior in their children. All of them had been camping near Serpent's Spine Ridge. All of the children were between 6 and 13 years old, the same ages as the witch trial victims. I drove to each campsite to document what was happening. The patterns were becoming clear and terrifying. 8-year-old Ashley Martinez was found at dawn arranging 13 stones in a perfect circle, humming a colonial-era hymn she'd never heard before. When her parents asked where she learned the song, she said, "Mercy taught it to me. She said they used to sing it before the bad men hurt them." 11-year-old David Chen had carved names into tree bark using symbols that looked like colonial-era letters. When I checked the historical records, they were the exact names of the 13 witch trial victims, spelled in 17th century style. 9-year-old Rebecca Foster was speaking in what sounded like authentic colonial dialect. She told her parents, "The burned children doth wish to play, ere the red moon doth make them whole again." Her parents had never exposed her to period language. But the most disturbing case was 6-year-old Jamie Wilson. His grandmother found him at 3 a.m., standing outside their tent with his arms stretched toward the ridge. He was completely asleep, but tears were streaming down his face. When she woke him, he said, "The littlest burned girl was crying. She's only 6 like me. She wants her mommy, but her mommy can't hear her anymore." I realized that each modern child was somehow connecting with a colonial child of the same age. It wasn't random. These connections were specific and personal. That afternoon, I made a decision that changed everything. I was going to spend the night alone on Serpent's Spine Ridge. I needed to understand what was happening to these children, and the only way to do that was to experience it myself. I set up a small camp in the main stone chamber, the coldest spot on the ridge. As the sun set, I built a small, all fire, and waited. The temperature continued to drop even after darkness fell. By 10 p.m., it was below freezing, despite the fact that the weather forecast called for a mild October night. I could see my breath, and frost was forming on the rocks around me. That's when I heard them. Children's voices, distant at first, then growing closer. They were singing the same hymn that Ashley Martinez had been humming. The melody was beautiful but heartbreaking, a song of innocence mixed with sorrow. I grabbed my flashlight and walked deeper into the stone corridors, following the sound. The singing grew louder, and I could make out individual voices. A little girl's soprano, a boy's changing voice, children harmonizing together. Then I saw them. 13 children stood in a circle in a large stone chamber I'd never noticed before. They wore colonial clothing, long dresses, breeches, white caps. But their clothes were burned and tattered. Their faces were blackened with soot, and their eyes glowed with an unnatural light. They looked exactly like Lucy Patterson's drawing. The smallest one, a girl who couldn't have been more than 6, noticed me first. She smiled and waved. Art thou the lady who helps children? She asked in a sweet voice that echoed strangely off the stone walls. I couldn't speak. I was looking at dead children who had been murdered almost 300 years ago, and they were talking to me. We know thee, said an older boy, maybe 13. Thou did lose thy own little daughter. We are sorry for thy loss. My heart stopped. How could they know about Emma? We have seen her, said another girl, about 8 years old. She plays in the bright place where children who die young do go. She is happy and whole. Tears started streaming down my face. I wanted desperately to believe them, but this was impossible. Dead children don't speak. Ghosts aren't real. Why are you here? I managed to whisper. The oldest boy stepped forward. We died unjustly, in pain and fear. Our souls cannot rest while our murderers live unpunished. But the men who hurt us are long dead. So we must find another way to find peace. What way? The littlest girl answered, her burned face still somehow sweet and innocent. We must have friends to play with us when the red moon makes us strong. Living children, like we used to be. If they join us in death, they can help us cross to the bright place where your Emma waits. Horror washed over me as I understood. You want to kill the children. Not kill, said the 8-year-old. Save. We will take them from this world of pain and bring them to a place where they will never suffer, where they will never grow old or sick or sad. But their parents will mourn as thy parents mourned for thee when thou wert young, but mourning passes, and the children will be safe forever. I thought about Emma, wasting away in that hospital bed. How many times had I wished I could take her somewhere safe, somewhere the cancer couldn't touch her. Show us, I said, hating myself for the words. The oldest boy smiled. Tomorrow night, when the red moon rises, we will become solid like living children. We will play one final game, and all the children who have spoken with us will join us forever, including thee, if thou dost wish to see thy daughter again. He gestured, and suddenly Emma was there. My little girl, exactly as she looked before she got sick, healthy and laughing, wearing the pink dress I buried her in. She ran to me with her arms out. Mommy, I've missed you so much. I fell to my knees and reached for her, but my hands passed through her like smoke. She wasn't really there. Tomorrow night, Emma said, her voice fading. You can hold me again, Mommy, forever and ever. Then all of them were gone, and I was alone in the freezing stone chamber with only the echo of children's laughter. I stumbled back to my camp and sat by my dying fire until dawn, shaking and crying. Part of me wanted to believe it was a yes, a hallucination brought on by cold and grief. But deep down, I knew what I had seen was real. The blood moon was rising tomorrow night. 13 ghost children were planning to murder every child who had been having dreams about them. And they were offering me a chance to be with Emma again if I let it happen. The next morning brought the call I'd been dreading. Sarah, my supervisor's voice was grim. We have another missing child, 10-year-old Amanda Price. Her family says she walked into the forest around midnight, following voices calling her name. This time, we didn't find the child by morning. Amanda Price was never coming back alive. I knew it in my heart, but we searched anyway. For 2 days, teams of rangers and volunteers combed every inch of the forest around Serpent Spine Ridge. We found no trace of her, no clothing, no footprints, no sign she had ever existed. But the other children were getting worse. Jamie Wilson's parents brought him to the ranger station because he wouldn't stop crying. He kept saying that Amanda was playing the waiting game with the burned children and that she was getting ready for the Red Moon party. Lucy Patterson had started speaking exclusively in colonial dialect. Her parents were terrified because she no longer seemed to recognize them. When they tried to pack up their campsite and leave, she threw a tantrum and screamed that she couldn't go because her new friends needed her. Most disturbing of all, Marcus Kelly's hair had turned completely white overnight. When his parents took him to a doctor, tests showed that his body was aging at an impossible rate. The doctor said it was like his cells were deteriorating as if he were an old man, not a 10-year-old boy. Time was running out. On October 30th, the day before Halloween and the blood moon eclipse, I made a decision that would haunt me forever. I called the parents of every affected child and told them to bring their kids to the ranger station. I know this sounds crazy, I told them, but I believe your children are in supernatural danger. Something on that ridge is targeting them, and tomorrow night during the eclipse, it's going to try to hurt them. Some parents thought I'd lost my mind, but others had seen enough strange behavior from their children to listen. By evening, I had 7 children and their families gathered at the station. Lucy Patterson, Marcus Kelly, Ashley Martinez, David Chen, Rebecca Foster, Jamie Wilson, and Tommy Morrison. I locked the doors and windows. I armed myself and 2 of the fathers with hunting rifles. I figured if I could keep the children away from the ridge until after the eclipse, whatever supernatural power was affecting them would fade. I was wrong. At 11:47 p.m., just as the lunar eclipse began, every child in the building started walking toward the door. Not running, walking. In perfect synchronization, like they were marching to music only they could hear. Their eyes were open but vacant, and they all wore the same peaceful smile. "Stop them!" I shouted to the parents. We tried, but when we grabbed the children, they felt as light as air, like we were trying to hold on to smoke. They walked right through our arms and moved toward the door. Lucy Patterson reached the door first. She placed her small hand on the deadbolt, and the metal turned red hot. The lock melted away like it was made of butter. All 7 children walked out into the night. "Follow them!" I yelled. But when we tried to leave the building, we couldn't. Some invisible force held us back. We could see out the windows, but we couldn't cross the threshold. Through the window, I watched the children walk toward Serpent Spine Ridge. They moved in a perfect line, holding hands, their faces turned up toward the blood-red moon. And walking beside them, barely visible in the moonlight, were 13 other children in colonial clothing. The ghost children had become solid. I don't know how long we were, trapped in that building. It felt like hours, but it might have been minutes. Time seemed broken during the eclipse. Finally, the invisible barrier released us, and we ran toward the ridge. What we found there will stay with me until I die. In the main stone chamber, 13 colonial children and 7 modern children stood in a circle around a roaring fire that burned without wood. The flames were the same red as the eclipsed moon, and they gave off no heat, but they lit up the entire chamber like daylight. The ghost children looked solid and real now. I could see details I'd missed before. The colonial girl named Mercy had blonde braids. The oldest boy, Thankful, had green eyes. They looked like normal living children, except for their burned clothing and the ancient sadness in their eyes. Our children stood among them, smiling peacefully, but I could see they were aging rapidly. Marcus Kelly looked like a teenager now, his face gaunt and lined. Little Jamie Wilson's hair was gray and his hands looked wrinkled. "Welcome, adults," said Thankful, the oldest ghost child. His voice echoed unnaturally in the chamber. "You have come to witness the great game. Your children have chosen to join us in death so that we might all find peace together." "Let them go!" screamed Mrs. Patterson. "They're just babies." "As were we," said little Mercy, her 6-year-old voice eerily calm. "We died in terror and pain, crying for our mothers. These children will die surrounded by friends, knowing they go to a better place." I stepped forward. "You said I could see Emma again." The ghost children parted and Emma appeared by the fire. She looked exactly as she had in life, 7 years old, bright eyes, missing front tooth. But she seemed more solid now, more real. "Mommy," she said, holding out her arms, "I can hug you now, but only if you come with us." Every fiber of my being wanted to run to her, to hold my daughter one more time, to never let her go again. But I looked at the other children, Lucy and Marcus and all the others, and saw how they were aging, how their life was being drained away to feed this supernatural ritual. Emma, I said, tears streaming down my face. I love you more than anything in this world. Then come with me, Mommy. I can't, baby. These children need me to protect them, just like I protected you when you were sick. Emma's face crumpled. But I'm lonely, Mommy, and I miss you so much. It took every ounce of strength I had, but I said, I miss you too, sweetheart. But part of growing up is learning to be brave when someone you love can't be with you. You're being so brave right now. Emma smiled through her tears. I am brave, aren't I? The bravest little girl I know. That's when Thankful, the oldest ghost child, stepped forward. The ritual has begun. It cannot be stopped. These children will join us, and we will all find peace. But I noticed something in his eyes. Doubt. You don't really want to hurt them, I said. You're children too. You know what it's like to be scared and in pain. We died unjustly, Little Mercy said, but her voice wavered. Yes, you did. And that was terrible and wrong. But taking these innocent children won't fix what happened to you. It will just create more pain, more injustice. I looked directly at Emma. Baby, tell me the truth. Are you really lonely where you are? Emma's expression changed, becoming more mature than her 7 years. No, Mommy, I'm not lonely. There are lots of children where I am, and we play all the time. I just miss you. And I miss you. But missing someone doesn't mean we get to hurt other people to be with them again. I turned to the ghost children. You've been in pain for so long that you've forgotten what it feels like to really be children. Children protect each other. They don't hurt each other. The fire began to flicker and dim. The ghost children looked at each other, confusion and hope warring on their burned faces. For the Fitian, first time in 300 years, someone was treating them like the innocent victims they had been instead of monsters. We just wanted the pain to stop, whispered Little Mercy. I know, I said. But causing pain to others won't heal your pain. Let these children go back to their families. Let them live their lives. Thankful, the oldest, looked at our 7 modern children who were still aging rapidly in the red firelight. If we release them, we return to the cold stone. We return to waiting and loneliness. No, said Emma, stepping forward. You don't have to be lonely anymore. She held out her hand to Little Mercy. Come with me. Come to the bright place where children go. You don't have to stay trapped here anymore. One by one, the other ghost children joined hands with Emma. As they did, the supernatural fire began to die down, and our living children stopped aging. But the men who hurt us were never punished, said Thankful. They were, I said. Not by human law, but by time and death and judgment. They're gone. You don't have to carry that burden anymore. The last flames flickered out, and the blood moon eclipse ended. Normal moonlight filtered into the chamber, and our 7 children collapsed to the ground, unconscious but breathing. As the ghost children began to fade, Little Mercy looked at me one last time. Will you remember us? Not as monsters, but as children who died too young? I promise, I said. Emma was the last to disappear. I love you, Mommy. Take care of the other children for me. I will, baby. I love you too. Then they were gone. The parents rushed to their children, who woke up confused but unharmed. The rapid aging reversed itself over the next few hours. By dawn, they all looked like normal kids again, and none of them remembered anything about the supernatural experience. Except for one thing. They all remembered playing with Nice Chi, children who were sad but aren't sad anymore. My name is Maria Santos, and I've been a forest ranger for 8 years. I thought I knew everything about predators and how they hunt. I was wrong. It was October 1987, and I was working in the Cherokee National Forest in Tennessee. The leaves were turning colors, making the mountains look like they were on fire. But Shadow Mountain was different. Even in broad daylight, the thick trees made everything look dark and spooky. I'm 31 years old and have a 6-year-old daughter named Sophia. Before I became a ranger, I worked at a zoo, so I know how animals think and act. That's why they sent me to Shadow Mountain when the hunting accident started happening. The mountain is 30,800 feet high, covered in old trees that have been growing for hundreds of years. The branches are so thick that even at noon it feels like evening. You can only get there by walking on old trails. No roads, no cell phone towers. When you're up there, you're completely alone. The weather was getting bad fast. An early winter storm was coming and the temperature was dropping every hour. Ice was starting to form on the trails, making them slippery and dangerous. 8 years studying how animals hunt, I said to myself as I walked up the mountain trail. And I thought I understood pack behavior. Then I met the dogmen and learned some packs never stopped growing smarter. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning. 3 days earlier, my boss called me into his office in town. "Maria, we have a problem up on Shadow Mountain. A hunting party went missing." 6 experienced hunters had gone up the mountain and never came back. These weren't weekend amateurs. They were local guys who had been hunting these woods their whole lives. They knew every trail, every cave, every dangerous spot. "When did anyone last hear from them?" I asked. 4 days ago, they were supposed to check, in by radio every morning." I knew something was seriously wrong. Good hunters don't just disappear, especially not 6 of them at once. And Shadow Mountain had a bad reputation. The old-timers in town said it was cursed. Back in the 1920s, there was a logging camp up there. 47 workers were killed in one night. The official report said wild animals did it, but nobody believed that. What kind of animals could kill that many grown men? "I want you to go up there and find out what happened," my boss said. "You're the best tracker we have, and you understand animal behavior better than anyone." I packed my gear carefully. Extra batteries for my radio and flashlight. Emergency food for 3 days. My rifle and plenty of ammunition. First aid kit. Compass and maps. Everything a professional ranger needs for a dangerous search. But as I started walking up that mountain, I had a bad feeling in my stomach. The woods were too quiet. No birds singing. No squirrels chattering. Even the insects seemed to have disappeared. I've been in forests all over Tennessee, and they're always full of life. But Shadow Mountain felt empty, like something had scared all the animals away, or eaten them. The trail was covered with fallen leaves that crunched under my boots. Every step seemed too loud. I kept looking over my shoulder, feeling like something was watching me. But every time I turned around, there was nothing there. About 2 hours up the trail, I found the first sign of trouble. Boot prints in the mud, heading deeper into the forest. 6 different sets, just like the missing hunting party. But there were other prints, too. Bigger ones. I knelt down and examined them carefully. They looked like dog prints, but they were huge, bigger than any dog I'd ever seen. And there was something else strange about them. They seemed to show claw marks, but also what looked like thumb pry. Nuts. That didn't make sense. Dogs don't have thumbs. I followed the trail deeper into the woods. The trees got thicker and the shadows got darker. My radio crackled with static, but I couldn't reach anyone. The mountain was blocking all signals. As the sun started to set, I made camp near a small stream. I built a fire and heated up some canned soup. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched from the darkness beyond my campfire. Just before I went to sleep, I heard something that made my blood run cold. It sounded like voices, but not quite human. Like someone trying to copy human speech, but getting it wrong. I grabbed my rifle and listened carefully. Nothing. Just the wind in the trees and the crackling of my fire. But I knew something was out there. Something that had taken 6 experienced hunters. Something that was now watching me. I didn't sleep much that night. I woke up at dawn to find my campfire had been disturbed. Someone or something had scattered the ashes in a perfect circle around where I'd been sleeping. But there were no footprints. Whatever did it was smart enough to cover its tracks. My hands shook as I made coffee. In 8 years as a ranger, I'd never seen anything like this. Animals don't make patterns. They don't think about covering their tracks. I packed up quickly and followed the boot prints deeper into the forest. After about an hour, I found the hunting party's first campsite. Their tents were still standing, but everything inside was gone. Sleeping bags, food, equipment, all missing. But no signs of a struggle. No blood, no torn fabric, no scattered gear. It was like 6 grown men had just walked away from their camp and vanished. I found their second campsite a mile further up the mountain. This one was different. The tents had been slashed open, but not randomly. The cuts were precise, methodical, like something with claws had carefully opened each tent to look inside. That's when I found the first body. His name was Tom Henderson. I'd met him a few times in town, a quiet guy who ran the hardware store, He was hanging from a tree branch about 10 feet off the ground, but he hadn't been hanged. Something had carried him up there. The worst part was his face. His eyes were wide open, staring down at me. His mouth was frozen in a scream. But there were no wounds on his body. He looked like he'd been scared to death. I radioed for help, but got only static. The mountain was blocking all signals. I cut Tom down and examined his body. No bites, no scratches, no broken bones. But when I looked closer, I found something that made no sense. There were marks on his arms and legs, like he'd been grabbed by hands. But the grip marks showed claws instead of fingernails. I heard a branch snap behind me and spun around, rifle ready. Nothing there, but I could feel eyes watching me from the shadows. "Hello?" I called out. "Is someone there?" The forest was completely silent. No wind, no birds, no insects. Just dead quiet. I decided to follow the trail of the other 5 hunters. Their boot prints led deeper into the forest, toward the old logging camp ruins. But there were those other prints too, the big ones that looked like dogs with thumbs. The trail went up a steep hill covered with thick bushes. I had to push through branches that grabbed at my clothes and scratched my face. At the top of the hill, I found something that changed everything. It was an observation post. Someone had built a platform in a tall tree about 20 feet off the ground. It was made from branches and tied together with what looked like rope. But when I looked closer, I realized it wasn't rope at all. It was intestines. Human intestines, dried and twisted into cord. I climbed up to get a better look. From the platform, you could see for miles in every direction. You could watch anyone coming up the mountain trails. You could track them, follow them, hunt them. This wasn't built by any animal. This was built by something intelligent, something that was hunting humans. I climbed down fast and kept following the trail. The boot prints were getting more spread out, like the men had started, running. The dog-like prints were everywhere now, coming from different directions, like a pack surrounding its prey. I found the second body in a small clearing. This one was different, much worse. Jake Morrison had been the leader of the hunting party, a tough guy who'd served in Vietnam. He was sitting against a tree, perfectly positioned like he was just taking a rest. But when I got closer, I saw the truth. He'd been skinned. Someone had carefully removed all the skin from his body and then dressed him in it again, like putting clothes on a doll. His rifle was placed across his lap, but the barrel had been twisted into a knot. What kind of strength does it take to twist steel? There was something carved into the tree behind him. Symbols I didn't recognize. They looked ancient, primitive, but somehow organized, like a language. I took pictures with my camera, but my hands were shaking so bad most of them came out blurry. I had to get out of there. I had to get help. But first, I had to find the other 4 hunters. The trail led to a rocky area near the top of the mountain. The boot prints stopped at the edge of a cliff, but there were no bodies at the bottom. I looked over the edge carefully, just trees and rocks 50 feet down. That's when I heard the voice. "Lost, Ranger?" I spun around, rifle raised. Standing 30 feet away was something that looked like a man but wasn't. It was at least 7 feet tall, covered in dark fur, with a wolf's head on a human body. It was standing upright on 2 legs, but its hands ended in claws. It was wearing clothes, torn pieces of hunting gear taken from the missing men, a camouflage jacket, a hunting vest, a baseball cap that said, "World's Greatest Dad." "Where are the other hunters?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. The creature tilted its head like a curious dog. "Hunters? We are hunters. You are prey. It His voice was rough, like it had learned to talk by listening to humans but didn't quite get it right. But it was definitely speaking English. "What are you?" I asked. It smiled, showing teeth that were too long and too sharp. "Evolution," it said. "What humans should have become." Then it howled. It wasn't the howl of a wolf. It was something else. Something that called to its pack. From the forest around me came answering howls. Different voices, but all the same unnatural sound. I was surrounded. I ran. I crashed through the forest like a madman, branches tearing at my clothes and face. Behind me, I could hear them coming. Not just footsteps. The sound of bodies moving through the trees, jumping from branch to branch, keeping pace with me easily. They were hunting me, but they weren't trying to catch me yet. They were playing with me, like cats with a mouse. I made it to a small stream and splashed across, hoping the water would hide my scent. On the other side, I found a fallen tree and hid behind it, trying to catch my breath and think. That's when I heard the voices. "Help me! Please! Someone help me!" It sounded like one of the missing hunters, like he was hurt and calling for rescue. The voice came from deeper in the forest, where the trees were thickest. I almost went to help. That's what rangers do. We rescue people. But something stopped me. The voice sounded wrong, too perfect, too clear for someone who'd been lost in the woods for days. "Maria! Maria Santos! I know you're out there." Now it was using my name, but how could it know who I was? Unless, "Please, I'm hurt, I can't walk." The voice changed. Now it sounded like my daughter Sophia. Like my 6-year-old daughter was lost and scared and calling for her mommy. My heart almost stopped. For a second I almost believed it, almost ran toward the sound. But Sophia was safe at home with my mother, 3 hours away from this nightmare. They were copying voices, learning human speech, using it to hunt. I stayed hidden behind the fallen tree until the voices stopped. Then I heard something worse. Silence. Complete, total silence. Even the wind had stopped. They were close. Very close. I looked around carefully and saw them. 7 of them standing in a circle around my hiding place. They'd surrounded me without making a sound. Each one was different, different sizes, different colored fur, different pieces of human clothing. But they all had the same intelligent, hungry eyes. The one in the middle was the biggest, the leader. It was wearing a park ranger uniform, my uniform, but it was too small for its massive body, stretched tight and torn. "Hello, Maria Santos," it said in a voice that sounded almost human. "We've been waiting for you." "What do you want?" I asked, rifle pointed at its chest. "Your territory," it said. "Your kind keeps coming to our mountain, hunting our prey, taking our resources. We need more space for our pack. This is public land. It belongs to everyone." The leader laughed. It was a horrible sound, like broken glass. "Everything belongs to whoever is strong enough to take it. We are stronger. Where are the other hunters?" "Learning," it said. "Teaching us. Humans have interesting responses to pain. Very educational." My blood went cold. The other hunters were still alive, being tortured, being studied. "Let them go," I said. "Why would we do that? They're teaching us about human weakness, about how you think, how you react, how you break." The circle started moving closer. I could see their muscles tense, getting ready to attack. "You humans think you're so smart," the leader continued. "But you're predictable, soft, weak. You have tools, but you don't have instincts. You've forgotten how to hunt." "We'll see about that," I said, and fired. The bullet hit the leader in the chest. It staggered back a step, looked down at the blood spreading across its stolen uniform, then looked back at me and smiled. "Interesting," it said. "Painful, but not fatal. We heal fast. Do you have more bullets than we have time?" The wound was already closing. I could see the flesh knitting itself back together. I ran again. This time I headed downhill, toward the old logging camp ruins. If there were buildings there, maybe I could find shelter. Maybe I could make a stand. But they followed easily, howling to each other like they were having fun. They could have caught me any time they wanted. They were faster, stronger, and they knew these woods better than I did. They were hurting me, driving me exactly where they wanted me to go. The ruins appeared ahead. Old concrete foundations, rusted machinery, a few walls still standing. I ran toward the biggest structure, what looked like it had been the main office building. Inside I found horror. The missing hunters were there, all 4 of them, still alive, but barely. They'd been hung upside down from the ceiling beams like meat in a butcher shop. They were conscious, but their eyes were empty, broken. "Maria," one of them whispered. It was Bill Peterson, who owned the gas station in town. "Is that really you?" "I'm here," I said, trying to figure out how to get them down. "I'm going to get you out of here." "No," he said. "You can't. They're too smart, too strong. They've been studying us, learning from us." "Learning what?" "How we think, how we feel, how we suffer." His voice was barely a whisper. "They're not just animals, Maria. They're something new, something that learned from watching us." I heard footsteps outside, slow, deliberate. They'd found me. "They know you're here," Bill said. "They let you find us. It's part of their experiment." The leader appeared in the doorway. "Very good, Ranger. You found our classroom." Behind him came the others, 7 pairs of glowing eyes in the darkness. "What are you learning?" I asked, still pointing my soyam rifle at them. "Human nature," the leader said. "We've watched your kind for decades, studied your behavior. You think you're civilized, but under pressure you become just like us. Savage, desperate, willing to do anything to survive." "You're wrong." "Am I?" "Look around you, Maria Santos. 4 of your kind, hanging like prey. And you want to save them, don't you? But you also want to save yourself. Which is stronger, your compassion or your survival instinct?" I didn't answer. "Here's your test," the leader said. "You have 6 bullets left, 7 of us. You can't kill us all. But if you shoot the hanging humans first, end their suffering quickly, you might have enough bullets to slow us down. Might escape." I stared at him in horror. "Or," he continued, "you can try to save them. Waste your bullets on us. Watch us heal. And then we'll kill you slowly while they watch. Their suffering will continue." "There's a third option," I said. "What's that?" I smiled. "I burn this whole place down." I pulled out my lighter and backed toward a pile of old lumber soaked with motor oil. The dogmen tensed, suddenly looking worried. "Fire?" the leader said. "Clever. But this building is concrete and steel. It won't burn fast enough." "Maybe not," I said. "But I found something interesting when I was looking around." I nodded toward the corner where several red gas cans sat next to an old generator. "The loggers left fuel behind, lots of it." The leader's eyes went wide. For the first time, he looked afraid. "You'll kill your own kind," he said, gesturing to the hanging hunters. "They're already dead?" I said, looking at Bill and the others. "You broke them. Best I can do now is make it quick." Bill nodded weakly. "Do it, Maria. Don't let them learn anything else from us." I flicked the lighter and tossed it onto the oil-soaked wood. Flames erupted instantly, spreading fast across the floor. The dogmen howled in rage and fear. They rushed toward me, but I was already moving. I grabbed one of the gas cans and threw it into the fire. It exploded like a bomb, filling the building with flames. The creatures scattered, some on fire, all of them making sounds I'd never heard before. Not howls, not screams, but something in between. I ran for a hole in the back wall, diving through as another gas can exploded behind me. The whole building was becoming an inferno, but I wasn't safe yet. Through the flames I could see shapes moving. They were hurt, but not dead. and they were angry. I ran into the forest, using the light from the fire to see where I was going. Behind me, the building collapsed with a crash that shook the whole mountain. Then I heard something that chilled me to the bone. Laughter. The pack leader emerged from the flames, half his fur burned away, skin black and blistered. But he was healing even as I watched. "Impressive," he said, his voice now raspy from smoke. "You think like a predator. I respect that." "It's over," I said. "I destroyed your base, killed your prisoners." "You freed our prisoners," he corrected. "Now we don't have to feed them anymore. And you taught us something valuable." "What's that?" "Humans are most dangerous when they have nothing left to lose." He smiled, showing teeth stained with blood. "We need to remember that for next time." The other pack members emerged from the burning ruins. 6 of them, all injured but alive. All healing. "Next time?" I asked. "Oh yes. You don't think this ends here, do you? You've seen us now. You know we exist. That makes you dangerous." I raised my rifle, but my hands were shaking. I was down to 3 bullets, facing 7 creatures that could heal from almost any wound. "But," the leader continued, "you've also proven yourself worthy of respect. You fought well, thought like a hunter, showed proper pack instincts." "What are you saying?" "I'm offering you a choice. Join us or die here." "Join you?" I stared at him in disbelief. "You're monsters." "We're in the future," he said. "Evolution in action. Your kind had your chance to rule this planet. You failed. Too soft, too weak, too concerned with being civilized. We're not weak." "Aren't you?" "Look around, Maria Santos. This mountain belongs to us now. We've eliminated every human who entered our territory for 2 years. Rangers, hikers, hunters, all gone, all feeding our pack." He was right. That explained the missing persons reports I'd been seeing. All the people who disappeared near Shadow Mountain. "Your government will send more rangers eventually," he continued. "More soldiers, more police, and we'll kill them all, learn from them, grow stronger. Someone will stop you." "Who?" "You can't prove we exist. No bodies, no evidence, and even if you could, who would believe you? Giant wolves that walk upright and use tools, that heal from bullets, that speak English?" He had a point. Even if I survived this, who would believe my story? "So here's my offer," the leader said. "Walk away. Forget what you saw here. Never come back to our mountain. In exchange, we won't expand our territory beyond these woods, won't hunt in your human towns. And if I refuse, then you die here and we expand our hunting grounds anyway. Your choice." I looked at the burning ruins behind him, at the 6 other creatures surrounding me, at my rifle with 3 bullets that couldn't really hurt them. I thought about my daughter Sophia, safe at home with my mother, about all the other families who had people working in these mountains. "How do I know you'll keep your word?" I asked. "Because unlike humans, we don't lie. We don't need to. We're apex predators." I lowered my rifle slowly. "Smart choice," the leader said. He reached out one clawed hand. "But first, you need to be marked." "Marked?" "So other packs will know you're under our protection, and so you'll remember this agreement." Before I could react, he grabbed my arm and dug his claws deep into my flesh. Pain shot through me like lightning. But it wasn't just pain, it was something else. Like he was marking me not just physically, but somehow deeper. "There," he said, releasing my arm. "Now you carry our scent. Any of our kind will know you've made a pact with us." Blood ran down my arm, but the wounds were already starting to close. Whatever he'd done to me was changing me somehow. "Go," he said, "and remember our agreement. Stay away from Shadow Mountain. Forget what you saw here." I walked away slowly, not turning my back on them until I was deep in the forest. Then I ran. I made it off the mountain just as the sun was rising. My radio started working again once I got to lower ground, and I called for backup. But what could I tell them? I reported the hunting party as dead in a fire. Equipment malfunction, tragic accident. No survivors found. The other rangers bought it. The fire had destroyed all the evidence of what really happened, just another wilderness tragedy. But I knew the truth, and the creatures on Shadow Mountain knew I knew. I transferred to desk work the next week, told my boss I needed a break from field operations, needed to spend more time with my daughter. He understood. Rangers burn out all the time. The truth was, I couldn't go back into the forest. Every shadow looked like a hiding place. Every animal sound made me reach for my gun. I'd see movement in my peripheral vision and spin around to find nothing there. The scars on my arm healed, but they left marks. 4 parallel lines that looked like claw marks. They didn't hurt, but they were always warm, like something living was beneath my skin. Sometimes at night, I could swear I heard howling in the distance, even though I lived in town now, miles from any real wilderness. The creatures had marked me, and somehow I was still connected to them. I started monitoring missing persons reports across Tennessee, hikers who vanished, hunters who never came home, campers who disappeared without a trace. Most of them were near mountains, near forests, where something intelligent could hide and hunt. The reports increased over the next few months, not just in Tennessee, Kentucky, North Carolina, Virginia. Like the pack was growing, expanding, teaching others. I never saw them again, but I knew they were out there, watching, learning, evolving. 6 months later, I got a call from a ranger in Kentucky. 3 experienced mountaineers had vanished near Cumberland Falls. Same pattern, no trace, no bodies, no evidence. We found something weird, though, the ranger said. Observation posts built in trees, like someone was watching the trails. I knew what that meant. The pack was expanding its territory, breaking the agreement. Or maybe there were other packs now. Maybe the idea was spreading. I never told anyone the real story. Who would believe it? Giant wolves that walk upright and speak English. Creatures that heal from bullets and use human tools. But late at night, when my daughter is asleep and the house is quiet, I write down everything I remember. Every detail of those 3 days on Shadow Mountain. Not for publication. No one would believe it. But for the future. Because someday, someone else is going to encounter them. Some other ranger or hunter or hiker is going to face what I faced. And maybe my story will help them survive. The scars on my arm are warm tonight. Warmer than usual. Like something is calling to me from the mountains. Evolution doesn't stop just because we stopped paying attention. Some predators learned from us, adapted to us, and now they're better at being predators than we ever were. And they're still out there, still learning, still growing stronger. The pack hunters of Shadow Mountain were just the beginning. My name is Robert Mackenzie, and I've been pulling bodies out of these West Virginia cliffs for 23 years. I thought falling was the worst way to die in Dead Man's Gorge. Then I heard the screaming from inside the mountain. People don't understand what it's like being a ranger in coal country. When I tell folks I work search and rescue in Monongahela National Forest, they picture me helping lost hikers find their way back to campsites. What they don't picture is me rappelling down 600-foot limestone walls in the middle of the night, trying to scrape what's left of somebody off the rocks before their family sees it. I know death. Knew it before I ever put on this ranger uniform. Spent 15 years underground in the mines before a support beam came down wrong and took most of the hearing in my left ear. That accident saved my life, strange as it sounds. Forced me up into the sunlight, into this job where I could use what I learned about ropes and tight spaces to help people instead of just digging coal for some company that didn't give a damn if I made it home. The hearing loss taught me something useful, though. When you can't hear everything the normal way, you start feeling sound instead. Vibrations through your bones, through the rock itself. I can tell when a cliff face is about to give way just by pressing my palm against the stone. Saved more than one life that way. Dead Man's Gorge earned its name honest. The limestone walls drop straight down for 600 feet, and the bottom is nothing but jagged rocks and a creek that turns into a raging river every spring. The acoustics down there are strange. Sounds bounce around and get mixed up, so you might hear your own voice coming back to you from 3 different directions. Local folks have always said the place is cursed. It goes back to the 1880s when there was a big mining operation in these hills. Something went wrong, cave-in or gas explosion, stories change depending on who's telling it, and they lost almost 90 men in one day. Company just sealed up the mine and walked away, left those boys buried down there like they never existed. I never put much stock in ghost stories. Dead is dead, and I've seen enough of it to know. But that was before March of 1979, when everything changed. The call came in on a Tuesday morning. Early spring thaw had the ice breaking up in the gorge, and we had severe thunderstorms rolling in. Perfect conditions for somebody to get themselves killed. 3 rock climbers from the university had been practicing their technical climbing on the north face when they heard something that made them scramble up their ropes faster than they'd ever moved in their lives. "There's a woman screaming for help down there," the lead climber told me when I met them at the parking area. His name was Dave, senior engineering student, the kind of careful climber who checked his gear twice and never took stupid risks. "She's trapped somewhere inside the cliff face. We could hear her clear as day, but we couldn't see any cave openings or cracks big enough for a person." I studied the cliff through my binoculars. Solid limestone, weathered smooth by 1,000,000 years of rain and wind. No visible cave mouths or crevices, but sound plays tricks in the gorge. Maybe there was someone hurt down at the bottom, and the echoes were making it seem like the voice came from inside the rock. "How long ago did you hear this?" I asked. "About an hour. We waited around for maybe 20 minutes, but the screaming stopped. Then it started up again, just as we were packing to leave." That's when I heard it myself. A woman's voice, high and desperate, crying out for help. But Dave was right. It wasn't coming from the bottom of the gorge. It was coming from inside the cliff face, somewhere about halfway down the north wall. The sound raised every hair on my arms. In 23 years of rescue work, I'd never heard anything like it. The voice was too clear, too close. And there was something else wrong with it, something I couldn't put my finger on right away. I radioed for backup and started getting my gear ready. Whatever was happening down there, somebody needed help, and that was my job, even if everything about the situation felt wrong. The screaming came again as I was checking my ropes. This time I was ready for it, and I pressed my palm against the limestone to feel the vibrations. What I felt made my blood go cold. The sound wasn't just coming from inside the rock. It was making the whole cliff face vibrate like a tuning fork. In all my years working with stone and mountain rescue, I'd never felt anything like it. Sound just doesn't work that way. My backup arrived as the 3rd round of screaming started. Jerry Walsh, been my partner for 8 years, and 2 younger rangers I'd been training. They all heard it clear as day. "Jesus, Robert," Jerry said, staring at the cliff face. "That woman sounds like she's dying." I timed it. The screaming lasted exactly 4 minutes, then stopped. 23 minutes later, it started up again. Same duration, same timing. Too regular to be natural. "Jerry, call the university geology department. Tell them we need someone with ground-penetrating radar out here fast. There's got to be a cave system we don't know about." I finished coiling my rope. "I'm going down to take a look." "The hell you are. Not alone, anyway." But I was already rigging my rappel anchor. Something about those screams was eating at me. They sounded familiar somehow, like a song you can't quite remember. And there was that wrongness I'd sensed earlier. The voice was too loud, too clear, like it was being amplified somehow. I started my descent during one of the quiet periods. The limestone was slick from the morning frost, and storm clouds were building overhead. Not ideal conditions for Technica, a rescue, but I'd worked in worse. Halfway down, I found what I was looking for. Hidden behind a natural curtain of rock, almost invisible unless you were looking at exactly the right angle, was the entrance to a cave. Big enough for a person to squeeze through, but you'd have to know it was there to find it. I switched on my headlamp and called up to Jerry. "I found a cave opening. I'm going in to investigate." "Wait for backup!" But I was already squeezing through the opening. The cave was bigger inside than I'd expected, part of a natural limestone formation that probably connected to the old mine workings somewhere deeper in the mountain. My light showed a narrow tunnel stretching back into darkness, with fresh scratches on the walls like someone had been clawing at the rock. That's when I heard the footsteps behind me. I spun around, heart hammering, and saw a shape moving in the tunnel entrance. Human-sized, but wrong somehow. Moving too smoothly, like it was floating instead of walking. "Hello?" I called out. "Ma'am, are you hurt? I'm here to help." The shape stopped. In the bouncing light of my headlamp, I caught a glimpse of pale skin and dark hair, but the features kept shifting like I was looking at her through water. Then she opened her mouth and screamed. The sound hit me like a physical blow. Not just loud in a way that reached inside my chest and squeezed my heart like a fist. I felt blood trickling from my nose, tasted copper in my mouth. The cave walls around me started to crack, tiny stress fractures spreading out from where the sound waves hit the stone. I stumbled backward, hands over my ears, but the screaming seemed to come from inside my skull. My damaged left ear was ringing like a fire bell, and the vibrations were traveling through my bones, making my teeth ache. The woman, or whatever she was, moved closer. In the strobing light, I saw her face clearly for just a second. Beautiful and terrible at the same time, with eyes like black holes and a mouth opened impossibly wide. Then the scream reached a new pitch, and one of my headlamp bulbs exploded. I ran, squeezed back through that cave entrance faster than I'd ever moved, rappelled down the rest of the cliff face like the devil was after me. Maybe he was. When I reached the bottom, I was shaking so hard I could barely untie my ropes. Jerry was waiting with the radio. "Robert, what the hell happened up there? We heard the screaming again and then something like an explosion." I looked up at the cave opening, now just a dark spot on the cliff face. "We need to evacuate this area, now." "What did you see?" I was trying to figure out how to explain what couldn't be explained when we heard the screaming start again. But this time it was different, louder, angrier. And it was coming from multiple places at once. Not just the cave I'd found, but from deeper in the mountain, echoing through hidden passages and forgotten mine shafts. The sound rolled across the gorge like thunder, and I felt it in my bones. Every bird for a mile around went silent. Even the wind seemed to stop. That's when we found Tommy Briggs. He'd been one of the university climbers, the youngest of the three. Must have gone back down into the gorge while we were busy with the rescue preparations. We found him at the bottom, next to the creek that runs through the deepest part of the canyon. He was still alive when we reached him, but barely. Both eardrums had burst, blood trickling from his ears and nose. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was his eyes, wide open, staring at something the rest of us couldn't see, while his mouth moved in a silent scream. He died before we could get him out of there, and his last words were barely a whisper. "She's so beautiful. Why won't she stop singing?" By the time the geology team arrived the next morning, I'd done some research of my own. Spent half the night in the county records office digging through old mining, surveys, and accident reports from the 1880s. The Dead Man's Gorge Mining Company had operated 3 separate shafts in these hills. The main operation was deeper in the mountain, but they'd run smaller tunnels right through the gorge itself, following veins of coal that ran along the limestone deposits. On March 15, 1883, something went wrong. The official report called it a catastrophic structural failure. A cave-in that started in the deepest shaft and spread through the whole mine complex in less than 5 minutes. 89 men underground when it happened. The company managed to get 23 of them out alive, but the rest were trapped too deep to reach. What struck me was the timing. The survivors all reported the same thing. The cave-in happened in stages, exactly 4 minutes apart. First, the main shaft collapsed. 4 minutes later, the secondary tunnels. 4 minutes after that, the final section came down, sealing the mine forever. And then there was the widow. Mary Catherine Donovan, 26 years old, married to Patrick Donovan, the mine foreman. When the cave-in happened, Patrick was in the deepest part of the mine, checking on a gas leak the workers had reported. Mary Catherine spent 3 days at the mine entrance, screaming for the company to dig deeper, to find the men who were still alive down there. The company refused, said it was too dangerous, too expensive, sealed the mine with concrete and walked away, leaving 66 men to die in the darkness. Mary Catherine was found a week later at the bottom of Dead Man's Gorge. The official report said she jumped, but the miners' families knew better. She'd been asking too many questions about safety violations, about warnings that were ignored, about the gas leak that Patrick had been sent to investigate without proper equipment. Dr. Sarah Chen, the geologist from the university, set up her equipment at the top of the gorge while I told her what I'd learned. Ground-penetrating radar, seismic sensors, acoustic analysis gear, technology that could see through solid rock and to map what lay beneath. "There's definitely a cave system down there," she said, studying her readouts. "Extensive, too. Looks like it connects to some kind of man-made tunnels about 400 feet down. And Robert..." She looked up at me with worried eyes. "I'm reading seismic activity, not earthquake activity. Sound waves. Massive sound waves originating from deep underground." That's when Jerry came running up from the gorge. "Robert, we got a problem. Big problem." Another climber had gone into the gorge during the night. Sarah Martinez, experienced cave explorer who'd heard about our mystery woman from the university kids. She'd rappelled down to investigate the cave I'd found, and she'd been down there for 6 hours. We could hear her screaming. Not the regular screaming that came every 23 minutes. Sarah's voice, raw and terrified, begging for help. But mixed in with her cries was something else. The other voice, the one that turned stone to powder and made strong men die with blood running from their ears. I was rigging my gear for another descent when Jerry grabbed my arm. "You can't go down there. Whatever's in that cave, it killed Tommy Briggs and it's killing Sarah Martinez. We need to call for backup, get some kind of specialist team. She'll be dead by the time they get here. She might be dead already." But I could hear Sarah screaming, and I knew what that sound meant. She was alive and she was terrified, and she was trapped with something that shouldn't exist. This time I went down prepared. Ear protection, emergency flares, and my grandfather's old mining helmet, steel and leather that had kept him alive underground for 40 years before the mountain finally got him. Dr. Chen had rigged me with a radio headset and a small seismic sensor that would record whatever I found down there. The cave entrance looked different in daylight. Bigger somehow, and darker. The scratches on the walls were deeper too, carved into the limestone like someone had been clawing at the rock for years. I found Sarah about 50 feet into the tunnel system in a natural chamber where the cave opened up into a larger space. She was pressed against the far wall, staring at something in the center of the chamber that my light couldn't quite illuminate. "Sarah, I'm here to get you out!" She turned toward me, and I saw what 6 hours in that place had done to her. Her fingernails were torn and bloody from clawing at the stone. Her eyes were wide and unfocused, like she'd seen something that broke her mind. Blood had dried under her nose and around her ears. "She's beautiful," Sarah whispered. "She's so beautiful, and she won't stop singing. She wants me to stay with her. She wants me to help her find Patrick." That's when I saw her. Mary Catherine Donovan stood in the center of the chamber like she'd been waiting for us. Tall and pale, wearing a dress that might have been white once but was now the color of old bones. Her dark hair flowed around her face like she was underwater. And her eyes were holes in the world, black spaces that seemed to pull light into them and swallow it whole. When she looked at me, I felt something cold wrap around my heart and squeeze. But it was when she opened her mouth that I understood what we were really dealing with. Her mouth opened wider than any human mouth could open, unhinging like a snake's jaw, and the scream that came out wasn't just sound. It was grief made into a weapon. 100 years of rage and loss and betrayal, focused into sound waves that could shatter stone and stop a man's heart. I felt my ribs vibrate, felt blood vessels bursting in my nose and ears. The walls of the cave started to crack and crumble. Through the ringing in my ears, I heard Dr. Chen's voice, "Oh," and the radio. "Robert, get out of there. The seismic readings are off the charts. The whole cave system is destabilizing." But Sarah was on her knees now, blood running from her ears, and the banshee's scream was getting louder. I had maybe 30 seconds before the sound killed us both. That's when I noticed the symbols carved into the chamber walls, not random scratches. Deliberate markings, letters and numbers carved deep into the limestone. Mining survey marks, the kind my grandfather had taught me to read when I was a boy. And there, in the deepest part of the chamber where Mary Catherine's screams were focused, I saw something that made everything click into place. A section of the wall that wasn't natural limestone at all, but old concrete and steel, the sealed entrance to the Dead Man's Gorge mine shaft. She wasn't trying to kill us. She was trying to break through. "Sarah, cover your ears and follow me," I shouted over the banshee's wails. "Stay close and don't look at her." But Sarah was too far gone, lost in whatever spell Mary Catherine's voice had woven around her mind. The scream reached a new pitch, and I watched Sarah Martinez die the same way Tommy Briggs had died, conscious and aware while her body tore itself apart from the inside. I ran for the sealed mine entrance, my grandfather's helmet light cutting through the darkness. Up close I could see how old the concrete was, cracked and crumbling after nearly a century. And carved into the stone beside it, almost hidden by mineral deposits, were words in my grandfather's handwriting. They sealed us in. "Tell Mary Cat we tried to get home. P. Donovan, March 1883. Patrick Donovan, Mary Catherine's husband, the mine foreman who'd been sent down to check that gas leak. My grandfather had known him, worked beside him in those tunnels. They'd died together when the company chose profit over human life." Mary Catherine's screaming stopped suddenly, and the cave went silent except for the sound of falling pebbles. I turned around slowly, and she was right behind me, close enough to touch. Close, I could see through the supernatural terror to the woman underneath, young, heartbroken, driven mad by loss and injustice. "You're Patrick's blood," she said, and her voice was different now. Sad instead of terrifying, lonely instead of enraged. "I can see him in your face. See John Mackenzie, too. Your grandfather was a good man. He tried to get Patrick out." I nodded, not trusting my voice. The walls around us were still cracking from her earlier screams, and I could hear water starting to seep through the stone. The spring floods were coming, and if this chamber flooded with us in it, "They're still down there," Mary Catherine continued, looking at the sealed mine entrance. "Patrick and your grandfather and all the rest. 66 men who died because the company wouldn't spend money on proper supports, wouldn't listen when Patrick told them about the gas. They sealed them in like they were nothing." "Mary Catherine," I said carefully, "they're gone. They died 100 years ago." Her eyes flashed with that terrible black light. "Gone? Gone where?" "They're 10 feet behind that wall, boy. 10 feet and a century of lies. The company called it an accident, paid the families $20 each, and walked away rich. But I know the truth. Patrick wrote it all down. Everything they did wrong. Every warning they ignored." The water was coming faster now, ankle deep and rising. The storm had finally broken overhead, and Dead Man's Gorge was becoming a death trap, just like the mine had been. "The truth's already out," I told her. "I found the records. Everyone knows what really happened. Records can be buried. Truth needs to be seen, touched, held in human hands." She moved toward the sealed entrance, and when she touched the concrete, it began to crack. "Help me break through. Help me bring them home." I understood then what a century of grief could do to a hum and soul. Mary Catherine Donovan wasn't just a ghost. She was a force of nature, powered by love and rage in equal measure. And she was right about one thing. The truth was still buried behind that wall. "If I help you," I said, "will you let me get out of here alive? If you help me, I'll finally be able to rest." The water was waist deep now and rising fast. I had maybe 5 minutes before the whole chamber flooded. But I thought about my grandfather, about how he died in darkness, because rich men valued money more than human life. I thought about Tommy Briggs and Sarah Martinez, killed by a grief so powerful it had survived death itself. I pulled out my emergency explosives, small charges meant for clearing rock falls and rescue operations. If Mary Catherine's screams could crack stone, Maybe a little help would bring the whole wall down. "Stand back," I told her, and began setting the charges around the weakest points in the concrete seal. She moved to the far side of the chamber, and when the explosives went off, her voice joined the thunder. Not screaming this time, but singing. A lullaby, soft and beautiful, like a mother calling her children home. The wall came down like it was made of sand. Behind it lay a sight I'll never forget, as long as I live. The mine shaft stretched back into darkness, but I could see them in my helmet light. Dozens of men in old-fashioned mining clothes, exactly where they'd been trapped when the cave-in happened, preserved by the cold and the dry air, sitting quietly in the darkness like they were waiting for someone to call them up for dinner. And there, right at the front, was a man who looked just like me. John Mackenzie, my grandfather, 25 years old when the mountain killed him. Next to him sat Patrick Donovan, Mary Catherine's husband, still holding the notebook where he'd written down all the safety violations that had caused the disaster. Mary Catherine walked past me into the mine shaft, and as she moved among the dead men, something changed. The terrible cold that had filled the chamber began to fade. The black holes that had been her eyes became warm and brown and human again. When she knelt beside Patrick's body, she looked like what she'd always been, a young woman who'd lost the man she loved. "Time to come home," she whispered, and kissed his forehead. The water reached my chest, and I knew I had to get out or drown. But as I turned to go, Mary Catherine called my name. "Take this," she said, holding out Patrick's notebook. "Make sure people know what really happened. Make sure they pay for what they did." I took the notebook and ran for my life. I made it out of that cave about 30 seconds before the whole chamber flooded. Jerry and the emergency crew pulled me up the cliff face while water poured out of the cave entrance like a waterfall. By the time the flood receded 3 days later, the entrance had collapsed completely, sealed forever under tons of limestone and concrete. But I had Patrick Donovan's notebook. The pages were still readable after a century underground, protected by the dry air and Mary Catherine's supernatural presence. Every page detailed safety violations, ignored warnings, and deliberate corner-cutting by the Dead Man's Gorge Mining Company. Patrick had documented everything, right up to the day he died trying to fix problems the company refused to acknowledge. The story made headlines across the country. Corporate murder disguised as industrial accident, families cheated out of compensation, working men buried like they never existed. The mining company was long gone, but their descendants still lived off the fortune built on those men's graves. The lawsuits took 3 years to resolve. In the end, the families of the buried miners received nearly $2 million in compensation, plus funds for a proper memorial at the entrance to Dead Man's Gorge. 66 names carved in black granite, with the truth written underneath. They died because greed mattered more than human life. I kept working as a ranger, but something had changed in me. Started advocating for industrial accident victims, helping families get the truth about what happened to their loved ones. Turns out there are a lot of Mary Catherine Donovans in this world. People whose grief is so powerful, it won't let the dead rest easy. The screaming stopped the day we broke through that wall. Dead Man's Gorge is still dangerous. The limestone is unstable, and the spring floods turn the whole canyon into a death trap. But it's not haunted anymore. At least not by anything supernatural. Sometimes I go back there, though, stand at that memorial and think about what love can do when it's mixed with injustice. Think about how the dead don't rest easy when they died for someone else's greed. The truth has its own power. Sometimes it takes a century to surface, but it always finds a way to scream. And in the quiet moments when the wind blows just right through the canyon, I swear I can still hear her singing. Not the terrible wail of a banshee, but the soft lullaby of a woman whose husband finally came home. Mary Catherine Donovan found her peace at last. But the mountain remembers, and the dead don't forget. And there are other caves in these hills where other truths wait to be discovered. I'll keep listening for them. It's what rangers do. We bring people home, even when home is nothing but the truth carved in stone and the knowledge that someone somewhere still cares enough to remember their names. The mountain keeps its secrets, but not forever. Not forever.